Settle in. This is a quiet evening walk through England, the chalk paths that ride the South Downs like a pale thread hedge-bound lanes, where flint and brick keep a level edge, the canal locks, whose balance beams turn water into steps, water mills that lean their wheels into slow rivers, and harbour quays, where a beacon and a ring bolt make distance feel measured. Well, move slowly, no arguments, no loud music, no sudden cuts, just a steady voice and the small instruments of daily life. If sleep arrives, that's the plan. When you wake, the story will be right where you left it. The first part. The day opens pale over the South Downs, a soft line of turf where chalk sits close to the skin of the land. The path here is older than anyone, name hooves and boots pressed it level, rain slid off it politely, and the wind combed it smooth. On one side the drop rolls toward watermeadows, on the other a hedge hazel and hawthorn, with a little field maple keeps, the field where the field means to stay. Flint shows in the soil like dark tears in milk if you set a hand on one. You feel cold stored from a night that went about its business without making a speech. On the gatepost, a ring bolt waits. It is not a symbol, it is a way to close a thing with a rope so cattle will stay where cattle promised and walkers will remember to leave the hinge the way they found it. The keeper of this piece of track keeps a short length of hemp coiled on a nail he ties with a turn and a half, and the kind of tuck that learns to be kind back. The latch drops into its notch with the sound that tells you timber met iron, and neither felt offended. They keep hedges here by laying, not letting. Winter and early spring, the seasons for it. A bill hook hangs from the keeper's belt, short, curved, with a back you can trust for tapping, and a blade that knows the line between cut and harm. He chooses a stem at the base, leans it away from the line it grew, and slices through most of it, pleaching, leaving a tongue of wood to carry sap. The stem bends and lies along the line. He sets a stake of split oak, or a rhythm his father left in his hands, beats it in with a wooden beetle that has hit 10,000 other truths and kept quiet about all of them. He weaves binders long, springy hazel along the tops, so the hedge becomes one body. Birds will nest in it later, sheep will read it as a full sentence now. The field learns you mean it without anyone having to raise a voice. Below the path, a dew pond holds the sky in a shallow bowl lined with puddled clay. Chalk, for all its grace, drinks ponds ask for a skin. Men laid straw, clay, and chalk in lifts, treading with bare feet until the layers behaved as one, then finished with a scatter of chalk so hooves would not offend the lining. A windlass stands by for the bucket, rope simple, hand turned, no iron where water means to sleep in peace. A lad drops the bucket and counts to a number taught by his grandfather, then hauls, hand over hand, the rope finding the groove it carved last summer and living there as if grooves were what ropes wanted all along. On the hillside above, flint gets its turn at being useful. In the cutting near the farm, the wall shows chalk with flint nodules sitting in it like stubborn thoughts. A mason breaks out the nodules, knocks off the chalk rind, and sees the heart black, glassy, with a white skin where it parted from the chalk. He sets the best for napping spitting to faces that will dress a wall when set as a field of diamonds, and the rest for core in the farm track, a bed that drains and never pretends to be mud. He works with a hammer, then with a lighter tool on the knee, reading the way the stone wants to fail. Flint does not take orders, it accepts suggestions that arrive on time. At the bottom of the slope, a chalk stream slides under alders, clear as a thought someone was careful with. The keeper lays an ash pole across and sets the notches near the banks, a footbridge that chooses balance over drama. Over by the bend, a hatch gate oak on iron straps leans forward. In summer it lifts to send water down a carrier to the water meadow. In winter it rests and lets the main stream keep its gentle work. The handle turns once, twice water answers in a low tone. On a post nearby a board carries small notches that tell the keeper where enough lives in 3 seasons and a year that didn't behave. You can put your attention down for a little and nothing will be lost. The hatch will remember its place, the dew pond will keep its mirror, the hedge will keep its line. The path knows the way to the next gate without needing us to watch it. On the lane below, flints sit in mortar and make a wall that shines when rain leaps. The mason sets them napped face out, chalky cushion back to the core, triangles touching so weather runs off and envy has no place to sit. Between panels, brick coins red as a good apple keep corners honest. The line climbs to a stile made of 3 steps, set into the wall boot sawless, and the soft green of clampmorse agree to share space. A sparrow hops across the top stone, a man testing a beam, and finds nothing worth a remark. Where the track narrows to a green lane between banks, you can read centuries in the height of the hedge roots, and the way the bank cuts into the slope. Wheels made hollow's feet kept them tidy, to stop rain from teaching the lane to become a stream. The keeper cuts water bars with a spade at a slant, shallow and regular, and lays brush in them like whiskers. Water takes a hint lanes stay lanes. He carries a short-handled grape 3-tined fork forward, sting leaves and throwing them into the ditch, where they will become something kinder by Candlemas. Half a mile on, a parish boundary stone sits shoulder high in turf. The top face is cut with 2 letters, one for each parish. A groove runs between, shallow as the quiet line between neighbours who share the same weather and the same bell. Once a year the men and children walk the bounds and bump the boys lightly against each stone, so the parish will live in memory as well as in ink. The boys pretend to be surprised and are not. A clerk writes the names into a book and underlines the year. Underlines matter to men who count grazing rights and hedge lengths by season. In a fold of hillside lies a chalk pit, the small kind a farm cuts for lime. A kiln stands like a half-buried pot. Brick lining, draw holes at the bottom, a charging floor above. Through the week they set chalk lumps and brushwood in layers, brushwood and chalk. Then fire on Saturday, so Sunday heat will ride the burn through. Lime leaves as powder, quick and eager it meets water in a pit to become putty for mortar or wash for walls. The keeper stirs with a paddle, slow quicklime, like strong torque, behaves better with measured attention. Noon slides in with a handful of bread and cheese. The keeper sits with his back to a gate, the ring bolt a thumb from his shoulder. He carries a short ledger in a pocket, little irons for what he saw and did. To stakes replaced at the hedge, above long bottom style step reseated water bars cut 3 chalk pit burned fair. He writes with a blunt pencil that has learned to ride rough paper. If you drift for a moment, the pencil will still find the page, the style will still hold, the hedge will keep birds and wind in separate rooms. The track will be where it was when your eyes return. By the afternoon, the hedge layer moves to the far field. He finds a gap where a tractor took poor aim last October and left a bruise. He sets new stakes, pleaches the stems from either side into the open place, stitches them with a long binder and a tie of twisted willow. He slides a hand along the whole run and feels the way weight distributes to the stakes. The hand tells him where to add one more. He adds one more and says nothing aloud, which is the proper payment for a problem solved. Along the ridge, a finger post stands as a crossing. Arms point to villages. The letters run simple and deep old paint lies in the bottoms, where sun cannot be bothered. On the post someone not long ago carved a small mark, the shape of a broad arrow, with a line under it. The ordnance men once used such marks to tell heights from sea and get guns to mine their angles. The post doesn't care about history. It keeps its arms and lets everyone borrow them. A drover's road runs out toward open country, bank high, hedge tight, wide enough for a small herd to pass without teaching grain fields to be philosophers. The drover walks with a stick that has seen 3 coasts and 5 markets. He tips his hat at the keeper and receives the kind of nod that includes both a greeting and a shared rule about not letting beasts linger by a dew pond when other throats need it later. The drover carries a small horn at his belt. He never blows it without reason. When he does, it is for dogs, not people. On a bench by a flint gable, a woman sits with a basket of hedge offkits, straight hazel and a few ashworms. Her hands split a wand with a small knife and make pegs for thatch and skewers for the kitchen and little hoops for binding that will find their way back to the hedge when a gate needs a thought. Nothing leaves a hedge useless except pride. A church tower peeks over a fold in the land. The bell's rope has a sally of wool that a hand likes. The bell itself hangs on a timber frame that rests like a traveller taking a fair load and no more. When the clock strikes, it is not to startle, it is to mark the habit by which men know when to go home or when to look toward the lane to see if the carrier has brought the paper, 2 days late and still current enough to matter. Down in the bottom, where the chalk stream widens, a water meadow shows the old plan of carriers and drains a net drawn on the grass. In spring, when frost thinks it owns everything, water is spread thinly over the grass to keep cold off, and to feed warmth under later, the hatch is shut and the hay grows. The keeper walks the boards across the carriers, a bolting iron over his shoulder, and clears a notch where a stick might have set up to be important. He is kind to sticks, but firm with luck. A milestone at the lane edge shows a number cut in with a true hand, and no ornament. Below it, small letters name a town far away. Once wheels counted these numbers like beads, hours measured by the long, easy rise of the downs and the long, kind fall into a river vale. To horses stand in a field, and do not know about numbers, they know the sound of a bean lid, and the soft usefulness of a nosebag at dusk. Their tails switch at the same moment, and then go back to being separate. If you want to set your attention aside here, do so. The bell will strike an hour. You do not need to catch the water will slip where it intended. The hedge will hold the field and the lane in their places like a hand onto reins. Toward evening, a flint cottage shows its face to the lane checker of napped black and chop bright. Mortar brush back so faces stand proud. The step has a groove from boots, and the shallow white from chalk dust that never left a man soreless even when he tried to be a guest. In the small front garden, a rower of beans climbs poles, cut from hedgerow hazel. A child waters with a dented can. The water makes dark circles around the feet of the poles, and then decides to stay. The keeper returns to his gate and tests the ring bolt with 2 fingers habit. He tightens the rope with a short pull and a twist that needs no second thought. The coil goes to its nail. The nail knows the weight and leans a little, but not enough to make anyone worrying. He looks back along the line of hedge he laid this morning. It sits with a new quiet about it. Stakes straight, binders tidy, birds already considering the architecture. In the last of the light, the chalk track shows pale and useful, the kind of pale that lets you walk home without guessing. Down in the hollow, the dew pond throws the sky back to itself. A bat writes a measured loop, letting fly and water share one evening without spoiling it. The ring bolt catches the last thread of brightness. The hedge takes the last wind and keeps it like a teacher keeping order after the bell for 5 more seconds, because it matters what remains to name at the end of a day. A gate closed the right way, a hedge stitched at the base, a water bar cut just enough, a chalk pit left tidy, a rope tied with a knot you can untie with gloves on in January, a milestone that will look the same next week. Quiet instruments of keeping they add up to sleep without any of them needing to be clever. The second part. Mist hangs along the chalk stream like a clean ribbon. Alder and willow put their fingers down to the water and come away cool. Where the river kinks, a low weir spreads it thin, plank by plank, so part of the flow turns aside into a litre straight trench that mines the mill. Each plank stopboard carries an iron dog, so a hand can lift without having to argue with wetwood. A rack of oak teeth stands across the headrace weed, and a traveller's twig paws there until someone with a rake offers them a better plan. The mill sits low and long, brick and timber, with a roof that remembers weather. In the dawn, a door stands open, light reaches in and finds flour dust floating like the smallest thought. The miller walks the weir with a pike. He leans, taps a board, lifts one, slides it across to the stack and sets it on edge to drip. The sluice gate in the head oak, iron shod, comes up on a rack and pinion with a handle rubbed smooth by hands that count seasons better than books do. Water shoulders into the mouth and runs along the leat with a new purpose. You can hear the first certainty of the day from that sound alone. He looks at the fish ladder steps cut in stone on the side, notes that the water there has its own polite haste, and moves on. This is the head race under the willow. It slides straight into the mill's lower face and bends around the wheel pit. The wheel is breasted at water, meets it at mid-height in a pentrow, and fills buckets around the rim. Each bucket is a careful curve of elm planks sealed with tar and judgment. When the sluice opens, the trough gives its short, full sentence. The wheel agrees and turns. Inside, pit wheel teeth catch the wallower lantern gear, whose staves shine with oil, and the upright shaft carries turning upward into a place where grain becomes something a hand understands. Before the shout of the stones, there is the small grammar of checks. The miller walks the floor. On the great spur wheel-wide, wood-faced gear that sits like a low-planet stone nut, small gears are ready to be dropped in or out of mesh with a lever, so one pair of stones can work, while another rests. A smear of tallow on the shoe of the sack hoist is fresh. The tentering screw, the adjustment that raises or lowers the runner stone above the bed, turns true. Its threads carry no gall. He sets his palm on the bridge tree, the beam that carries the runner's weight, and feels the deep hum of the upright shaft choose its speed. He lifts a board of the ton, the circular wooden case, around a pair of stones, and looks once at the running face. No smoke, no cries, no hot mischief. He lowers the board, tucks the wooden wedges home. Grain waits in sacks under the eaves, each throat whipped with a thin cord and stopped with a stick. He puts a sack on the intake scale. A beam and a set of weights tell him the farmer brought what he says. He tips the grain into the garner bin, pulls a slide, and lets it flow to the hopper. A wooden funnel over the eye of the runner stone. The damsel, an iron pin that clicks against the shoed end of the hopper, tattles a gentle clack as the shoe shivers. That shiver feeds grain. Damsel, he once told a curious child, because she won't be quiet. And then he grinned like a man who tolerates noise from machinery and children in equal measure. The runner stone turns above the bedstone. One is fixed, one spins. They are dressed furrows cut across their faces with a mill bill, a chisel head on a wooden handle, so air and grain have somewhere to go, and heat has no chance to learn the habit of staying. French burr hardstone, pale and tough, sits under the ton. Today Derbyshire peak stone takes oats with a softer hand. Another day he sets the tentering screw a breath tighter. The song of the pair lowers a note. He tastes a pinch of meal between finger and thumb, rubs fine without feeling slick good. He pulls the cut off slide a thumb width, and the trickle becomes a line. The damsel keeps its gossip, the shoe keeps its modest tremble. Work begins. If your attention idles for a minute and looks instead at the motes in the light shaft, nothing here will need you. The wheel will do its usual thinking, the spur and wallower will agree, the stones will speak their dry bass, the sack will find its weight. This is the stone floor. The ton hums like a big bird asleep. A small trap in its top flips open. The miller peers down and sees the stream of grain wing and vanish at the eye. He closes the trap and checks the screens beyond the dresser. A long box with cloth and sieve inside. Rocking on a crank, sawmill will sort itself. Fine flour for a baker, middlings for a farm kitchen, bran for beasts who turn it back into something a field respects. He lifts a pommel and watches the sift a half minute. Today the cloth is clean enough. He will brush it at noon. On a beam the sack hoist waits. A rope runs up to the roof, over a pulley, down to a drum hidden among ratchets and common sense. He pushes the hoist's friction pulley against the mills, turning with a bar. The drum spins, the rope takes strain. A sack rises through the hatch and a hook that bites because it was made to. When the sack's mouth shows the floor, he catches it with a knee and a hand, swings it, and sets it down by the feed. The hook goes back to speechless waiting. He backs off the friction, so the hoist will not learn to overwork while no one is looking. Anchor. We are at the weir again, and the head gate. The miller steps out with his rake to clear the rack. Weed catches like Thatcher branch, tries to pretend it is a friend, and then gives up. He lifts the rake, shakes the teeth, and sets the weed on the bank for geese or the sun. The flow brightens through the grate. He looks upstream, reads the small ripples, and moves a board at the weir one notch to keep the fish ladder honest. His cap carries a light dusting of flour, because flour looks for places to live, like smoke, like gossip. He does not wipe it off. Back inside, a man brings barley. The man nods, lifts, sets his sack on the beam scale. The miller moves a weight, the beam balances, the man nods again. They talk with short words about weather, and about the rumor of a new bridge further down that will save a mile and annoy nobody except the farmer, who sells ale at the ford. The miller draws the toll from the grain, a small measured part, his right and his bread, and shows it in the wooden measure. A bushel if that is what was agreed, a peck if that is what a kitchen asked for. He tips the toll to a bean that has its own letter chalked on the side, so later he will remember whose due was whose. He writes a line in a book with a pencil that likes the way flour dust makes paper gentle. A ladder in the corner leans to the attic where the belts run. Leather loops pass over pulleys, one to rock the dresser, one to run the bolter when he feels like it, one to drive the hoist. Each belt knows its width and how much fight to offer. He keeps a pot of tallow and lard mixed to a friendly texture and touches it to bearings with a feather. Not a stick, too much fat starts a dirt collection. The feather writes a small signature and leaves. He checks a strap, hears a crackle, and trims a failing edge with a knife that he does not lend out. The basket under the bench holds strap offcuts that will later keep a chair leg from talking to the floor. When stones need dressing, the whole mill changes its breathing. He drops the stone nut out of mesh. The great spur will goes on with other work, but the pair under his hand falls quiet. He raises the runner with the lighter, a lever, and hook arrangement just clear. Sides planks across the ton top, and then tips the runner's heavy circle onto the board, as if he were teaching an egg to sit down without breaking. The bed stone looks up with its furrows a little dull. He takes the mill bill from its box. A mill bill is a steel head with two edges fixed in a wooden thrift that fits his hand like a name you never forget. Strike, lift, move, strike, lift, move. He cuts the dress into the stone face. Furrows crisp, lands flat, balance kept. It is not loud work. Each blow says something useful, and then the next says something else useful, and none of them tell lies. When he has circled the face, he rubs a pick over the lands to raise a small tooth. He wipes the dust away with a straw brush. He lowers the runner again, feels the face's kiss, and then stand apart by as much as a kernel. He smiles to no one. The lighter goes back on its peg. The mill resumes its old song but tuned. If you wonder, let yourself. The wheel will not be offended. The river will remember its two paths. The mill cats will patrol the sacks with their own schedules and no committee. Midday. He shuts the head gate a hand and lets the stone catch its breath while he steps outside. On the sluice island, he eats bread and cheese and an apple with one bruise and thinks nothing about the bruise. A moorhen stitches across the backwater with a noise like someone brushing a coat. On the far bank, a stave lean to dry for a future rake handle decides to fall and then changes its mind. Silence here is never absolute. It is a net that holds only the right-sized fish. Back at the beam, a baker's boy arrives with a cart. Flour will travel this afternoon. The sacks lie like patient animals, labelled with chalk, fine, household, bran. He reaches for the sacking needle to stitch a mouth. It sits in the little wooden tray next to the twine as it should. He runs a row of big stitches through the ears of the sack and ties with a butcher knot that will open when asked. He gives the boy a slip. The boy gives him a knot. The whole exchange no thicker than a twig and stronger than a post. This is the tail race. Water drops from the wheel's shadow and rejoins the river. It carries foam and a few heroes of weed. A trout holds under the lip of current and thinks its own thoughts, which are not complicated but are deep. Downstream a footbridge sits on stone abutments. The boards remember feet. Prom wheels, a milk pail once that fell and was replaced without anyone deciding to discuss the loss in public. A post beyond the bridge bears a simple board, depth at sill, with a line cut in it. The line matters when the stream comes up in rain and tries to carry the mill's habits away. It reminds a hand how far is too far long before the eye decides to be dramatic. Afternoon brings oats. Oatmeal asks for a different humour from stones. He slows the wheel at the gate and widens the tentacourse. Meal walks out. A sieve catches too big and sends it back. Beasts take what no one else wants and turn it into perfected. Polite piles in a field. On a bench, a set of measures gallon, quart, pint of tinned copper shine in their wooden rack. He checks a pint against the beam scale once a week, not because he doubts the pint, because he respects the habit of obedience in objects. A woman from the village brings a small purse for a small sack and news about a hedge gap that needs seeing to on the lane toward the chalk pit. He promises to tell the keeper if he sees him first. She smells the air. Warm bread and wheels, she says, which is not quite right, but close enough that both of them stand there a second and enjoy being nearly precise about their own place. Anchor again, small and easy. This is the great spur wheel. Big timber cogs pegged into the rim, each tooth dressed with a file, so the wallower will hear a soft courtesy and not a sharp argument. He makes that pass with a file on the last Saturday of the month. His father did. He will, too. He glances at the stive box, a little cupboard that collects fine dust near the stones, so it does not make a fog, and brushes it into a pail to be saved and sifted. Waste is a kind of advice, and today advice becomes bread later. Sometimes the river goes thin. Summer and the dry wind do that. Then the mill lets one pair of stones sleep and runs the other at a walk, or it stops. And the miller lifts stopboards at the weir, so trout can find their way, or he sends people home with talk instead of sacks, and nobody takes that as an injury. The beam scale rests. The damsel rests. The cats do not rest. Cats never admit they rest. Once a quarter, the millwright visits. He comes with a chest that has compartments so small a mouse would feel overhoused in any one. He checks timber wedges beneath the bridge tree and listens to bearings with a stick to his ear. He looks along the face of the pit wheel and lays a straight edge against it, just to persuade any daydreams to leave. He takes a skim off a bearing shell with a scraper and lays fresh tallow and graphite. He writes a line in the mill's book and then in his own. The two lines will meet in memory when needed. He drinks tea with too much sugar for the miller's taste, and they do not discuss it. If your lid's lower and the wheel's talk goes from language to lull, that is a good use of a minute. The hopper will feed in your absence. The cloth will rock. The tally will keep its tally without any theatre. Evening light slants across the stone floor and turns every floating grain into a golden statement that says nothing alarming. He shuts the head gate by slow degrees so pressure will not argue with wood. The wheel walks down to still. The wallower's voice falls to a murmur and then forgets it had one. He draws slides to shut the hoppers and sweeps the stone floor with a broom that when set upright will stand without leaning, which is a kind of promise a day appreciates. He ties to sacks for tomorrow's cart and writes 3 short lines. Barleycorn Simons, Wheat Fine R, Pond, Oatsmeal Cottage. He steps out to the weir and puts a board back in. Water remembers the level it likes. The fish ladder keeps its friendly stares. The leak becomes only a strip of quiet and Moorhen thinks again about crossing, then does. The brick of the mill face warms his shoulder for one last minute. He pockets the small hook he uses to lift a sack ear and the small pencil worn nearly to a thought. In the yard a stack of ash rounds waits to be made into rake handles and wheel spokes. He chooses one and peels a strip of bark to keep the habit alive in his hands. The strip comes off like ribbon. He laughs once, small and private, at the neatness of it. He sets the strip aside on a peg so it can dry and be a smoking twist for bees next year when a swarm arrives and someone asks him to help. Tools do not consider themselves single-use, neither do people here. The last task is simple. He lifts the trap that lets the tail race wash silt from a corner. It likes to accumulate in the wash runs. The corner becomes innocent again. He replaces the trap, pushes a stone onto it with his boot, and walks up to the door. The cats emerge with dignified faces that say we have inspected, and then permit themselves supper. He pins the latch from inside with an oak peg turned by his grandfather and rubbed by his father until it forgot to be new. Night shows as a shade in the glass panes, not a wall. The river keeps the small talk of near stones. The wheel holds a wet glimmer on one bucket and lets it go. Flour dust settles in the beam of the window, one mote at a time, down to the broad sill where someone once carved a date and then was embarrassed and rubbed it out. The mill breathes the way a room breathes after mending and after work, with relief that is so modest you only notice it if you wait. Tomorrow the boards will lift, the gate will rise, the wheel will take the weight, and the damsel will start her gossip again. A sack will rise, A measure will balance. A hand will taste flour and tell a screw to mind a hair. None of this is loud. All of it is why bread sits on a table and calls no attention to itself while saving the day. The third part. Morning finds a green where timbers lie numbered in chalk. Oak beams wait on trestles, straight-grained and squared, each face planed until a hand can travel without finding gossip. At one end a pair of scribe horses holds to posts upright, a tie beam rests across them like a patient shoulder. The carpenter sets out joints with a race knife fine. Bright lines that won't lift in damp then touches his marking gauge along an edge to score a depth the chisel will respect. A framed plan hangs from a peg. It is not art. It is a list of promises between wooden men. He begins with the mortise. An auger bites the oak at each end of the rectangle to clean holes, to give the chisel somewhere to stop. The brace turns, ratchet clicking. Shavings rise like curled butter, pale and tight. He clears the holes, then drops a mortise chisel into the scored lines and drives it with a beetle wooden mallet, rawhide lipped. The chisel lifts square crumbs, the mortise opens true. The sound is not loud. It is a steady knock that tells the next man where he is without asking him to look. He checks depth with a slip of wood cut to the exact measure, then holds the tenon blank across the post to see the meeting in his mind. The tenon is cut with a rip saw along the grain, then a cross skirt to shoulder. The saw rims a straight sentence, the shoulder plane trims. The arris gets one soft kiss of a block plane, so splinters will not write their own ending later. He lays the tenon into the mortise for a dry fit. It sits near enough to be promising and far enough to justify work. He pulls it out, bores drawbar holes through the mortise cheeks, then marks them on the tenon, shifting the tenon's marks a whisker tighter toward the shoulder. Later, when the pegs drive, the joint will pull home without iron. He whittles pegs from straight oak octagon first under a knife, then round under a shave, points them lightly and rubs them with a breath of tallow, so they will travel and seat without tearing the hole's goodwill. Frames are laid out full size on the ground, the English scribe rule. One post carries its own small errors, the beam carries its own scribing, transfers them, so they cancel when married. To carpenters kneel with a plumb bob and the race knife. They find the exact places where wood meets wood in this unique marriage. No measurement travels by numbers alone, lines travel. And lines do not lie if you keep them short and honest. A foreman checks with a square and a set of winding sticks. He turns the sticks, sighting for twist, and nods when the sight line comes even. He says fair and puts away boasting, because boasting teaches joints to move in August. Anchor. We are under the ash tree by the adze log. A timber lays across notch stands, a man walks its length with an adze, shaving high places down to level. The adze sings a small, hollow note when it strikes clean. The man's feet learn a rhythm, and his eyes learn the way a flat shines, different from a hump. A boy sweeps shavings into a tidy with a besom, and picks out nails with a magnet tied to string for when reclaimed timber hides old iron. The boy ties his laces again, because laces love to talk. When shavings live on the floor, he ties them well, learns to tuck the ends, and steps back without arguing. Brace work. Knee braces at the corners, long braces along the bays. They cut their shoulders generous and their tenons modest, because braces speak in compression and appreciate manners. A sleeker wide chisel with a long handle takes the last thin slice off a brace face. The slice falls in one sheet, white at the edge, fragrant and clean. The carpenter keeps his slick keen by kissing it on a stone that sits in oil. He wipes it with an oily rag that also loves hinges and small bolts. Lunch rides in pockets bread thick from yesterday's flour. A bit of cheese with a rind that does not need an apology. An apple with a small bruise that matters to no one. Men sit on timbers and do not lean on chisels. A jug of small beer lives under a board where sun cannot find it. A cup passes. Each man wipes it with the same clean end of a cloth that will later dust pegs. Conversation is short and skilled. It moves like a plane. Forward, level, true. You can drift a moment, watching the chalk numbers on OK1, A2, B1 line up like quiet soldiers. Nothing here forgets itself because eyes wandered. The marking gauge will still remember its cut. The auger will still wait in its rack. The peg bundle will still lie in the shadow, where pegs like to be. Afternoon, raising. Gym poles stand to either side of the new wall frame, planted deep and guide to stakes. A block and tackle hangs from each, beckets whipped, sheaves greased. Men lift the first bay by hand to knee height, then hip, then shoulder the tackles, take weight. The foreman sings short words that mean now and hold and walk. The frame rises in a calm arc. Sills find pad stones that were bedded yesterday on lime and patience. A post foot lands, then another, to men hold with bars, while a third sets a brace pin halfway to remind gravity that friends are near. Someone fetches the long level. The bubble centers a man with a beetle, taps a wedge under the sill to persuade a stone into its best self. A cheer would be out of place. A quiet breath through the nose does the job. The pegs go in. A drawbar pin, a tapered iron substitute for a wooden peg, tests and proves the bore. Then the true peg follows, tapped until its head sits proud. The draw-eyed joint pulls, tight shoulders, meet no light shows. Peg ends are left long to shrink with the seasons and get trimmed another day. Green oak will find its size and keep it. The foreman touches each peg with his thumb as he passes, not counting, confirming. Actual crow sits on the ash and does not give advice. Anchor. We are at the lime pit. Quicklime slate yesterday cools underwater. A crust has formed like cream on milk. A man lifts with a hoe and folds water into lime until the paste moves without lumps. A wooden lid drops back to keep rain from meddling. Lime wash later will find timber facings and brick panels and teach them to enjoy weather without resentment. Lime works slowly and never forgets its own discipline. It is a good partner for oak. Wattle and daub panels. Within the oak bays, hazel rods weave between staves, upright studs shaved to a flat on two sides. The rods slide under and over. A basket set into a wall. A daub of clay, chopped straw, a little cow hair. Unline pressing binds. The weave hands push it into the face until the rods disappear and the panel turns into a slow, forgiving skin. It dries to a tawny tone. Later the lime wash will make it chalk bright. A child pushes a thumb into a corner and the mother smiles and smooths it once, leaving the thumb there anyway in the way of houses that remember small truths. Scaffold rises, poles of fir, ledgers lashed with rope, putt logs crossing into the bays. No iron cramps today. Rope is kinder to timber and to men who might learn their knots again after a winter. A ladder hooks over the top rails so feet will not teach it to move. Someone shakes it anyway and is satisfied. A plank walkway receives a scattering of sand so sawless find grip without discussion. On the far side of the green, the thatcher lays out wheat reed bundles of clean, straight stems grown for this looms stacked like quiet loaves. A thatching needle and the bundle of sparse twisted hazel pegs wait in a wicker trug. He checks the roof boards. Laths run level, spacing a hand and the bit eave board firm. He begins at the eave, a bedding of long straw to thicken the foot. Then looms set but down, stems pointing to sky. He ties eave courses with sway rods and spars, thrusting each spar through reed and under lath in a stitch that teaches the wind how little it will accomplish. He rakes the face with his legged wooden paddle, with cross-grooved face stepping the reed into neat plane and line. If you let your attention slip to the way the reed ends make a soft, even shadow, nothing urgent will object. The spar will still bite the legget, will still set the course, will still climb one handbreadth at a time. The ridge will not rush to be born, it prefers correctness to speed. The carpenter returns to cut a housing for a wall plate, the long timber that will accept the roof's foot. He squares down from the post head, lays a gauge, and nicks the arris to keep a splinter from travelling. The rabbit cleans under a router plane that were soft as it moves. The plate settles into the housing without needing to argue. He bevels the plate's outer edge so rain will decide to leave. A set of common rafters comes next, birdsmith notches cut to sit true on the plate. Ridge plumb cuts sawn to meet their partners. To rafters go up as a pair, a temporary brace holds them at a polite angle. A line snaps between two pairs to keep the next ones honest. At the ridge, a carpenter with a small pouch of nails knocks a nail where a peg won't serve. Nails here are sparing. Oak loves pegs and hates iron rust, but a nail keeps to thin things together where a peg can't live. He wipes the head with an oily rag for no reason except habit prevents trouble later. He chats with the thatcher about the weather. They agree it will be dry enough today. Damp tomorrow morning. The thatcher nods like a man whose calendar is the smell of air and the feel of reed under his thumb. Thatching climbs in lanes up the roof. Each course overlaps the one beneath by 2 hands, or a little more, or each spar goes in a rhythm. Set, twist, drive. The face grows toward ridge with a plane that catches light kindly. At windows the thatcher cuts neat cheeks, trims edges with the hook knife, and dresses corners so water reads a simple map. At the chimney, a soaker of lead tucks under tile and over-read a mortar fillet later will keep the scene quiet. For now, a tarred felt slip guards the fresh cut because thatcher and mason agree to share rather than argue, which saves time and words. Anchor. We are at the ground, near the timber pile. A wagonwright checks a sole plate with a long straight edge. He picks up an auger to bore for a peg that will not be seen once a floor goes down. He sights along the auger's shank to keep it square. He listens to the bite. He stops half the depth and clears chips, so the auger won't burn. Burning in oak is not a sound, it is a smell, and avoiding it is cheaper than mending it. He smiles at a good shaving and sets the auger aside point down in a leather sock, so the edge won't find a neighbour's leg. In the cottage garden, a woman splits a withy and twists it into a hoop to bind a thatch roll at the eave. Her fingers know the pressure. The withy learns to be circular and stays that way without teaching the hoop to scold. She passes it up on a pole. The thatcher hooks it, ties it, and pats the place where it sits. He doesn't say thank you, because he doesn't need to. The work says it. Mid-afternoon, lime wash. The daub has skinned and holds. A man stirs a pail with a wooden paddle and lifts the brush soft. Broad brush up the face of the panel. Lime wash goes on thin, in 3 passes that find each other without leaving heavy marks. It dries to a quiet white next year. Another coat will deepen it and make weather mind itself. The oak will grey. The brush will hang from a nail by its thong, so bristles will dry straight. Nobody tells the brush how to feel about the world. It appears content. Glazier. Under the hedge's shade, strips of lead lion or a board H section came. Diamond panes cut from cylinder sheet glass greenish, and politesed it in a pile. Corners neat. The glazier lays a diamond into the cane, sets another, slides a wedge, solders joints with a copper bit heated on a brazier. A hole light to feet by 3 takes shape, then 2, then 4. Each goes into a timber casement. Oak takes lead kindly when the edges are chamfered. Hinges are let in with a chisel. Screws turned with a driver that has indulged no paint. When a window sets in the wall, the room behind it changes even if empty, for the simple reason that glass lets weather be seen without letting it in. If you drift, the room will continue to gather itself without fuss. The peg heads will be there when you return to look. The line will sit. The reed will keep its slope. Day does not require supervision. Here it prefers attendance. Ridge time. The thatcher lays a bed of sedge along the top and caps it with a patterned roll flush ridge. This parish, not a cut one. He ties the roll through to laths with spars in a zigzag a child can draw and an adult can trust. He dresses the ridge with a legget until it lies flat and reads as one line. He sticks a few spar crowns at the ends where birds prefer to land, so birds will learn that roofs have owners. He stands back and looks, not for praise, for the little thing out of line if he finds it. He makes it right without accounting for the minute, because that is what minutes are for. Inside, floor joists lay from girt to girt. A carpenter chops pockets and sets joists with a wedge tap. He drives a fixing here and there again, sparing where squeak would otherwise find encouragement. He lays wide boards, nails through the tongue, rubs a bit of soap on the nail to ease the drive. The boards settle like a conversation that does not need to end. He sweeps with a hard broom, grain aligned with the boards, so splinters that plan to take the broom out for a plague reconsider. Door frames, oak again. The jambs plumb, the head level. He ploughs a groove for a tongue to receive a plank door later. He cuts a rebate for a simple ledge dan braced door that will swing on strap hinges. The hinges sit on a bench, black with a blue at the knuckle from good heat. A blacksmith down lane made them yesterday on a hearth that never gets bored. The carpenter will set them flush to wood and fix with rosehead nails. The smith also made a handshake across trades. Dusk edges the green. The frame stands with open bays. The roof lies under a new skin that drinks the last light and lets birds ask questions it will never answer. Tools go back to racks. Chisels in leather rolls, saws on pegs, planes mouth down on a batten, so irons won't forget what sharp means. Peg bundles hang from a nail ligger's long split hazel lean for tomorrow's thatch face. The line of the sill rests on stones that are pleased to be useful and pleased not to move anymore. The carpenter writes 3 short lines in his book. North gable wall raised braces, seated ridge half-tide. The thatcher writes on a slate. Eve to ridge west face ridge set cheeks trimmed. The glazier wipes his copper bit on a rag and sets the rag on the brazier edge, so future him won't use it damp. The lime man puts the brush in clean water and shakes it once, not to make a fuss, to make it last. If you lay your attention down, the evening will carry it without dropping anything. A door closes on the tall shed. The latch catches a peg, slides in to keep night honest. The ash tree lets one leaf go, because that is what leaves do when day turns. A cat walks the sill and decides the new floor is acceptable. Night will bring dew to read and call to lime. The oak will shift a whisper and then sleep. Pegs will shrink a fraction and hold. In the morning, men will lift the next bay, the thatch will climb the other face. The lime will take its second coat, the glass will look out and learn the lane's mood. Work without drama, and with results enough to make a bed feel kind. The fourth part. Morning keeps its voice low in the weaver's room. A small sash window faces east. Light finds the lint on a skein and turns it into a mild weather of motes. The floor is deal boards worn by to shoes that never hurry. In the corner stands a swift collapsible arms of ash holding a hank of undyed yarn that remembers the wheel. Next to it, a warping board leans against the wall, pegs set in a rectangle like a quiet abacus. On the bench, a hook for the reed, a bone shuttle gauge, leaf sticks paired with a string, a chalk pencil, and a square of paper pinned to the sill with today's count. Anchor. We are at the swift and the winder. The hank opens and finds the arms. A hand sets a peg so tension stays polite. Yarn feeds to a bobbing winderer, small iron spindle driven by a belt that loops to the great wheel's rim. The wheel turns by foot, the spindle hums, the bobbin fills with a soft, even pyramid of thread. Not tight, remembers grudges later, just firm. 5 bobbins sit in a row. The 6th takes its turn. The winder whispers across the morning. Warp comes first. The warping board pegs set path and length. The weaver ties onto a start peg with a bow that will open without making a speech. She walks the yarn around pegs in a figure taught by work, not school. Back, across, down, across, back, each circuit a thread. At the least pegs she crosses one thread above, next below, so order will live through every trouble between now and cloth. She counts in tens under her breath, knots a short thread at 50, a longer one at 100, so the day knows where it is without looking often. The yarn runs through her fingers, and fingers read. Too much twist, too little, a thin place that needs company from its neighbors, so the fabric won't develop a habit of complaining. The chain comes off the board in a loose plate, warp bundled without tangling, least tied safe. She sets the loom full beaming. The back beam's apron rod waits, the least sticks slip in their place between cross and beam. The rattle comb of slots sits across the breast, so threads spread to the right width. Paper rolls brown craft, saved and flat, stand by to lay between layers as the warp winds on, keeping threads from cutting each other. She ties the warp to the apron rod in handfuls, lark's head, knots quick and true, and begins to wind, turning the beam by crank, paper after half turn, smooth, stop, smooth again. The wall plays with the sound of a soft deck of cards. Anchor. The bench of heddles. For shafts hang in the castle heddles, flat steel eyes line each like guards who prefer order to talk. Today's draft is plain weave, 2 shafts against 2, because the cloth is meant to be honest and lasting under hands and bowls. Tomorrow might bring a 2 halves twill. A diagonal that drinks light today repeats. 1 and 3, 2 and 4. She threads heddles from the lease, hook in hand, left to right, keeping the cross intact, so no thread forgets its position. So the cloth later will not forget to be cloth. The rhythm is steady hook, pull, settle, next broken only to tie a weaver's knots when a thin place admits it would rather not meet the reed as it is. Slaying the reed. The beater swings toward her the reed's slim brass dents in a wooden frame weights to divide the inch. 18 ends to an inch today. She slides to per dent foremost, one here and there to keep edges from drawing in. The slay hook goes in front, catches a pair, brings them through the reed ticks gently. She ties onto the front apron rod, across the width in small, even bunches surgeons, knot with a second cast, then goes back along and adjusts each so the tension reads like a level horizon under the fingertips. Where one group stands proud, a twist on the tie where one lies shy, a touch under the knot. The line disappears, the cloth to be lies waiting. The treadles under the loom carry cords to lambs and lambs to shafts wooden bones that turn futtock into rising heddles. She ties them so a foot on one brings 1 and 3 up. The other lifts to unfour. She tests brass, watch the shed open. A clean triangle of space between top and bottom layers press again. The other shed clean, even, ready. A Temple Little George stretcher sits nearby to keep the cloth's width honest on the first yard. It will leave once the fabric learns its own manners. Weft thread for crossing is wound on perns for the shuttle. The swift gives more, the spindle hums, the bobbin fills. She slides a pern into the shuttle's belly, thread through the eye of its nose. The shuttle fits her palm in a tool that has been a tool a long time. She sets it on the web, breathes out, sets her heels. First picks are the careful ones. She lifts a shed with the left foot, throws the shuttle right, runs the race across with a low wooden whisper. A new lane it remembers instantly. Beater forward, a kiss not a blow, left foot up, right down shuttle returns. To picks, one edge to edge, selvage held by a small extra twist of the wrist. She lays the temple teeth in the selvage and adjusts it a notch. The cloth begins not cloth yet, a small book of decisions that will be cloth shortly. If your attention wanders to the window linseed putty, faint ripples in the glass that bend a hedge into a quiet wave, nothing at the loom will leave its place. The treadles will keep their bargains. The shuttle will not forget the way home. She settles. The room's metronome sets itself, thump of beater, treadle change, shuttle hush, beater back. A tally pin clipped to the breast marks, inches the chalk pencil ticks a mark at a foot. She stops to count ends per inch with a thread counter under her thumb, adjusts weft tension a breath, and the field smooths. When a warp end snaps at the selvage, she hears it not a sound, not exactly, a shift in the machine sentence. She lifts the cross stick, finds the partner thread, draws a new end through heddle and reed with a leader, ties a tiny weaver's knot small as a freckleand, tucks the tail. The broken place is forgiven, the line resumes, all as before. Anchor, the wheel. In the second room, the spinning wheel waits, flyer and bobbin married by a drive band. A woman sets flax from a distaffer, wand with a bouquet of combed fibre into a long sliver. The foot finds the treadle, the wheel turns twist, climbs into the drafting triangle. A thread is born as hands feed fibre, with a calm logic. The flyer takes what the fingers give, the whirl keeps the same small argument with air and wind softly. After a while she winds off to a nidinoddy to crossbars that make a skein and ties it in 4 places, so it will not invent its own knots later in the dye pot. Dye is a quiet corner here, not a drama. Madder root in a crockules a russet, the way dawn would if asked twice weld, gives a yellow that does not brag. A little iron in the bath persuades both to think more somberly. When a rug is meant to hide a winter's worth of boots, wool takes what it is given, linen argues, then agrees cotton does not live here much yet in this lane. Though a shop in town shows a bale, and look south for ships. Skeins drip on a pole, the floor under them knows where not to be. Back at the loom, the cloth grows past the apron rod, over the breast, onto the cloth beam. Ratchet and pull counting inches with a click that would not wake a bee. Now and then she loosens the temple and moves it along the edges, stay straight as a rule. When the shuttle threatens to dive pern to full, she winds a little out and tries again. When the weft sinks deeper in 1 inch than its neighbours, She eases the beat for 2 sheds, and the field evens. Silences between repeats carry more weight than any single move. She reaches for a mug with a chipped lip that fits the loom rail, and sips something that used to be hotter, now friendly. On the sill sits a small scrapbook of drafts harness plans, drawn with pencil and a ruler. Next week she'll try a small point twill for a shawl promised before frost. This week she keeps the plain weave, and the good feeling of knowing exactly what the cloth owes her and what she owes it. If you let your eyes close for a minute, the shuttle will still find its lane, and the beater will keep time. The warp will wait under ordered tension, the pull will sit in its tooth. No thread here needs a witness to stay true. By noon, a yard and a hand are wound on the beam. She lifts the rod under the cloth, slips the stick under, releases the pawl to clicks, pulls the cloth forward, and sets the pawl again. The web settles across the breast with a little sigh the room likes. She picks 2 shots of waste thread at the head to save the edge from drift, then resumes the cloth yarn. Her foot quickens for a moment, then returns to the earlier pace. The loom prefers repetition more than speed. A neighbour steps in with a parcel. 2 skeins from the wheel room, spun a shade tighter for warp that will hold a bleached linen weft. They speak 3 real sentences whether the road to the market bridge still closed for repairs, a new baby born up the lane. The weaver marks her pick count on the paper with a short line and returns to the treadles. The neighbour's shoes recede down the path at a rhythm that matches the beater for 6 steps, and then decides to be its own rhythm again. Anchor the tenter field behind the fulling mill. Later, when cloth leaves the loom, it will visit a pair of wooden stocks that soften it with slow hammers and a little warm soap. Then it will stretch on tenter frames oak rails with tenter hooks, so it will dry at the width intended, not the width the day imposes. Children like the hooks name adults, like the way the cloth minds its instructions without sulks. The frame stands empty at their river keeps your place in that thought. Afternoon, the light changes. She works until the next chalk mark ties a thrum strip a bundle of ends from the last warp to keep tension in, as the loom eats the last few inches of useful length. The last inch of cloth before the knots asks for care. She moves the temple nearer the fell, lowers the beat, lets the weft sit instead of pushing. Then it is time. She lifts the warp from the front rod, cuts the last ends, ties fringe in small groups, because the person who gave their coins for this cloth likes a tidy finish. The cloth goes to the table, spreads, straightens. A steam kettle lifts once over the beam. There's a little wool to lie where it never quite wants to. Pats a weft tail under with a needle and writes a small word on a tag. The word is a name, not a boast. She sweeps the bench and the floor. Weavers sweep corner to corner. Thrums go in a bag for rag rugs or doll hair or a bird spring. The reed gets a soft brush through its dense heddles, straighten themselves when brushed with the flat of a palm. She loosens the tie-up cords so shafts won't remember tension overnight and try to shrink in their sleep. The shuttle goes to its shelf with the nose toward the wall so thread won't fall out and make trouble for the cat. The last look, warp left on the beam, for tomorrow's start enough to encourage, not enough to demand. Weft perns arrayed the note on the sill reading 7 ids plus 8 in, 18 epi, 18 pi because numbers, used quietly, help. She leans the temple against its peg, nicks the day's chalk mark with a smile, and lifts the latch. Evening thickens. The yard smells of wet flax, and the clean sour the mill always breathes out when fullers beat. Across the lane, the smith banks his fire. Farther down, the mill wheel turns slower. A bell says a number, no one argues with it. A thread on her sleeve glints, and then forgets too. She plucks it and wraps it on the chalk pencil, where similar threads sit. A small flag of work done and work to come. Tomorrow the warping boards count will go on. Heddles will take more threads. The shuttle will prefer the right lane again, and the pull will click the same patient sound. Cloth that holds plates and bread in hands does not practice speeches, it practices being ready. A person can rest well with that idea in the room. The 5th part. Before dawn has quite decided, stable lamps make small islands along the yard. The in-yard smells of hay and harness soap, not strong, just there. the way a pocket watch keeps a room honest without being loud. 4 stalls at the near side hold the change team for the up coach, from more at the far side belong to the down. Collars hang on pegs, the leather blacked yesterday and left to forget dust. Hames sit against them, steel brightware buckles polish them by work traces coil neatly, each buckle laid against its mate, so a sleepy hand won't have to think about which is which. The head arseler walks the line, palm to wither, thumb along the neck of each horse where the mane changes weather. He speaks names quietly: Jet, Miller, Bramble, and Snipe, and they flick ears without argument. A boy brings warm mash in nosebags, straps go over heads and settle. 2 minutes, not 3 oats wait for the road, not for before it. The harness bench carries a tin of tallow, a rag that knows where buckles want attention, and a small punch for a tongue that learned to be shy last week. The bench also carries the book. A page from last night reads to 40 down, change date axle hot, grease cool guards watch true, anchor. We are at the wheel. The coach stands with lamps doused, boot open, linchpins checked. The hubs are ironed, the wheel right yesterday, burn the tyre home, the fellies lie flush, spokes firm. A hand lays itself on the near rear hub. This morning only warm, because the day is young. A grease pot waits tallow and black lead mixed to kindness. A small spatula lays a smear that will not make a mess later. The linchpin goes through its castle nut, the little leather thong ties it down. One will be surprised by a wheel today, if the thong remembers its knot. In the office, the landlord pours a small glass of something steady and sets it aside for the guards, pocket against a fork. He writes times in the way bill. Up mail due 3:15. Out 3:17. He folds it under a slate. The postmaster sorts sacking bags, each locked with a brass padlock above a tag that names where it goes next: Reading, Basing, Beyond. He drops them into the coach boot with a controlled thud. Seals tight. Chalks one line on the boot lid, a habit older than anyone here, but still useful, and gives the guard a nod that says your time is my time now. The coachman steps in from the dark with his gloves warm under his coat. He gives the coach a fingernail count. Spring sound, drag chain free, pole leather not cracked, perch pin seated. He glances at the screw brake they fitted one last year, when Hills took a mood to instruct, and turns it twice to feel the thread sweet, then backs it to free. He handles the whip like a violinist handles a bow, carries it in a line that does not threaten, the thong hangs slack, not a sermon, a sentence. Harness on, collars up, hames set, pad saddles across backs, crupper tails smoothed and kind, traces clip outer, in a breeching straps snug around quarters, so weight on a hill won't teach wheels to lead. Pole chains fall true, the cross-jack on the leaders glints in lamplight. The coachman feels each buckle's tongue seat in its hole. What a thumb knows is often more useful than a speech. A boy steps back with the harness cloth and smiles to himself because the lines sit clean as a measure. The guard lights the lamps, oil in the fonts, wicks trimmed by a round-nosed trimmer. Chimneys warmed before lighting so glass won't think about cracking at a rude change of temperature. His horn lies in its loop to notes mean a road clear, a flourish for a gate, one long for a tunnel, and echoes to make the morning grin. He checks the watch against the stable clock, and against his own habit, the watch says 2 minutes to. The stable clock agrees. The habit looks at the eastern sky and says, right. A porter brings the last parcel for the boot, a tin-lined chest of tea that wants not to meet rain. He lays a rubbered cloth before the lid and straps it down crosswise. The coachman climbs to the box, takes the reins, and finds each pair in hand leader's lighting fingers. A wheeler's weight across the palm. He says nothing, he clicks once the team leans. The turnpike bar stands at the road's mouth. White gate across the lanes, a small lamp on its cap. The keeper hears the horn and lifts his latch. He swings the bar with a practiced wrist, lets the coach pass, and catches the bar as it hums back so it won't bang the post and wake a house that has no reason to wake yet. The guard throws a bag for the post box and catches a nod. A chalk mark on the ledger in the keeper's hut says the hour and the plate. Up mail 3:17. No more words. To early 4 words. Perfect time for habits. Road under wheel. Macadam broken stone rolled to a crown that sheds water at the right rate. Men walked this last week with brooms and rakes. A barrow stood where it needed to stand. A pick taught a hollow to stop being a hollow. On clay stretches, a brushwood faggot surface lies under the broken stone because the ground wants to pump and push on high chalk. The road sits like a fine board, firm, forgiving. The coachman reads the surface by feel through the box seat. He sets speed to what leather and bone like better than pride. Anchor, the posting in at the first stage. The lamp under the arch shows a low shine on brass numbers, 8 miles. A boy stands with a lantern and a pail. He turns the water quietly as if not to wake it. The change team steps from stalls at a whistle that has no sharpness in it. The present team comes to Withers specked with a fine white and not troubled by it. Buckles go traces. 4 men lift collars and set them on pegs. A damp cloth passes under the clay on a fanker. Hand shakes off water or a pat where horses keep their gratitude. New collars on, new hames, traces too, breeching too, pole chains fast, and the bar rings once where it likes to. 2 minutes turn into a coach that goes again. No applause. Inside, the kitchen heat greets travellers who make a daylight coach. At this hour, only the guard pours coffee that has lived in a pot since midnight and accepts it. The landlord's wife sets out small bread ends and a heel of cheese. It would be rude to call it breakfast. It would be worse to pretend not to be pleased by it. A postboy chalks up coach 2 minutes early on a slate that lives by the mantel, and then wipes it and forgets to be proud. The coachman takes the hill at the pace he knows the hill asks for. Leaders lean wheelers bring weight back into breeching. The screw brake turns a breath. Then to a stone cross at the bend watches without choosing sides. At the crown, a wind tastes of wet fields. The coachman loosens the reins a half inch and saves a word by saving his wrists. He hums a small line from a song that is not about coaches, because songs about coaches always forget something important. The guard wakes a hedge with 3 quick horn notes, not to impress the hedge, to warn a cart that might be sleeping against it. A mile of level brings a toll bar that stays open at this hour, because all the gates between mail stages do that by agreement. The barkeeper sits in a shawl, lamp turned low, and thanks the idea of schedules for what it means later when the day gets noisy. A cart stands aside. Its driver touches his cap and finds the hat better for sleeping than 4 salutes. The coachman lifts a finger. The cart driver owns a little of the road. Just for that second, that is enough. Anchor, a bridge over a slow river where frost erases its own name each winter. The parapet wears a notch where a careless axle once nibbled. The nibbled place has become part of the bridge's face. A depth board stands in the upstream pool with numbers cut deep at flood. The board teaches caution better than any man's story. A heron stands on the far mud and does not judge anyone's travel decisions. Second stage, daylight. The yard has a pump that knows its work and does not overdo it. The team has changed. The box seat finds a little more life in the leaders, because the man who trains at this stage has to talk to young horses and does not spoil them with jokes. The guard checks the bootstraps, and the male seal's one seal has twisted. He untwists it and lays it smooth. Nothing needed to be repaired. The world just needed one small correction. A farmer at the door watches the efficiency and knows that habit like this is the reason his letter will reach his sister 3 counties away in 2 days instead of never. Down the road, a frost hollow, then a rise where gravel turns fine. The coachman keeps his whip quiet. He taps the leader's near-side feather light. At the exact breath, the horse thought about looking at the hedge ahead of the crown. The horse keeps to the line. It looks like nothing. It is everything. There is a tunnel along this road. The brick arch holds a line of soot where lamps passed low last year. The coachman asks for lamps. The guard lights, then calls 3 notes on the horn. The team enters. Wheel rumble turns from gravel to a drum that teaches ribs to behave. Inside, cool holes like a hand on the back of the neck in summer. The coachman gives an inch of rain because dark asks for grace. A man with a handcart at the farmhouse stands aside, grateful not to have needed to run. The coach leaves the tunnel as if the tunnel were a room that asked for a quiet exit. Lamps douse bells from a near parish talk about nothing of consequence and do it well. At a long hill, a drag shoe rides the near rear wheel. The guard drops it from its hook, lays it, the chain bites, the shoe holds. The wheel rides the shoe lower than the road, the breeching takes the load, and does not complain. At the foot, the guard lifts the shoe, the chain rattles a little, the shoe goes back to its hook, a mental note goes to the page in the office that asks for the shoe straps to be oiled before rain decides to come in on a Tuesday. Anchor, the posting book. In the in-office, a ledger page shows a line for each stage, a long line across the country, times inked, delays marked, small words like fog, or a wheel right at third, or bar closed keeper, or buoy ready. The page is plain and carries a weight out of proportion to its pen strokes. A child asks what it is, and is told, the book that remembers, so we don't have to shout. Midday on the level, the coach meets a road repair. A man in a smock stands with a red board. The board shows and lowers in a rhythm that is not official but is wise. The repair is a patch where a frosty laminated stone, and the roller's last pass made a promise it couldn't quite buy with surface. The coach slows the men lay a last barrow, and 3 strokes of a rake, and an iron roller half the coach's height at the edge. They step back, a man taps the roller with the handle as if to say good enough to iron. The coach goes, picks up pace, and leaves the patch to decide not to become a hole, because the day shocks it less this way. Passengers for a day coach would talk here about hedges and fields, and a windmill on a rise, and the colour of brick in a village. The night coach keeps its counsel. A single old man sits inside, sleeping upright. Hat at his knee, he goes to a daughter near town. His bag has a loaf and a wrapped cloth that smells faintly of lavender. He wakes at a jolt, looks out at the shoulder of a horse and the glint of a trace, and goes back to the sensible idea that the road exists whether or not he points his eyes at it. There are places where coaches stop for reasons not written down. A woman at a lane end with a basket of buns once a week to the guard for a halfpenny, a doorway where a child waves at the horn and learns that schedules include Mercy, a bend where a tree once fell and men cut a new line with 3 spades and no arguing. And now anyone who passes nods at the place, because nods keep a story from becoming rumour. Late afternoon brings a town. The coach bangs once on cobbles, no harm, and swings under an arch into the big posting yard where 50 horses once stood in line, and now 12 stand in an order that is sufficient for a Tuesday. Hustlers appear like the idea of them had been waiting behind a door. The old team falls away to stalls, the new team steps in and takes the pole as if they had always been attached to it. The guard drops with the mailbags. The postmaster's man opens the door with the right key, brass polishing his palm. Bags out, bags in, seals checked, watch marked, a chalk line on the ledger that sits on a table that has seen soup, spilled beer, a map to quarrels, and a wedding ring set there during a draft and then not forgotten. If you forget to pay attention just here, nothing will spring forward and hurt the day. The bags will find their hooks. The horn will say a neat line. The horses will make their own music with hoof and iron. Not loud, not proud. Evening folds the road in. Lamps again the guard trims and lights. The coach leaves the town as the baker's oven gives up one more hot smell and then sleeps. The turnpike bar swings for the 20th time today and does not complain. The barkeeper's child stands in the doorway with a towel on his shoulder. Because he was polishing spoons, he sees the coach and learns that roads have schedules and houses have light. He will leave some day, or he will not. The schedule allows both. Night finds the yard where we began. The stable clock says a number that fits the page. The team pulls in, breathing like men who carried a decent ladder and were pleased by its balance. Buckles, full collars, lift blankets go on. A hand rubs the neck where a rain lay long. A bucket stands, so a horse who drank its measure will not be asked to prove anything. The coach is wiped along its glazing bars with a rag that never sees grit. The lamps are doused and chimneys cooled and set safe. The boot is opened and emptied of its last odd parceler, paper parcel with a string that will become part of a child's game tomorrow. The guard hangs his horn and says that will do, which is the only speech a day like this wants. The landlord writes the last numbers in the posting book and underlines them once, because someone told him once that an underline makes time feel respected. He drinks the small glass he poured for the guard, because the guard nodded it back and walked to his bed. He moves the slate for the morning coach half an inch left, because the yard boy places it half an inch by habit, and the landlord likes to give the boy the feeling that slates move of their own accord. Night is able to be trusted. The harness sits, the grease pot's lid is on, the screw brake lies easy. The linen cloth over the coach's seat will keep dust from teaching itself to be permanent. The horses chew the last hay quietly. The posting book waits for an incline at 4:07. The road continues, whether it knows it or not, in the dark, like a thought you can pick up any time without losing the place. The sixth part. Mist leaves the river and drifts into town before the sun can decide how bright to be. Under the market cross the cobbles hold last night's damp like a promise. A bell in the low tower lifts two small notes, then one, not to summon crowds, only to say that scales will open their mouths and keep them honest. Carts nose in from 3 roads wheels. Hush on wet stone canvas lifts back trestles unfold with the plain clack of wood that knows its job. Stalls rise in a rhythm. A butter board with a strip of clean linen. A basket 4 eggs lined with straw. A block for cheese with a knife whose edge lives in a leather sleeve. A cloth bench with a folded bolt and a yard wand with brass caps. At both ends a beam scalo calm. Iron pans. A steel yard for sack set on a post that was planed smooth 20 years back and oiled again last Tuesday. A small sign chalked in a hand that wastes no flourishes, says weight stamped measures proved. Anchor. We are at the beam scale beneath the cross. Iron pans hang level on hemp cords, whip served where they meet the hooks so fray won't find a foothold. Weights sit in a row, big round ones with lifting rings for quarter stone and half, smaller domed ones 4 pounds and ounces. Each carries a stamp, a small crown, and a yearlet bitten into brass by the seal of the inspector whose punch means a measure, want life for profit or pride. He comes once a season with a box that has its own tidy silk for punches he tests, marks, and closes the box as if it were a psalm. A rag sits nearby to wipe the pans between cheese and flour, so the day does not cross its wires. The first customers are hands from the farm's women with shawls pinned, men with caps pulled down to wear weather stops. Butter comes to the board in pats wrapped in damp paper. The seller lays a pat on the pan, sets a pound beside it, and waits for the arm to find the line. If the butter is heavy, the knife lifts a long curl if shy. A thumb presses the pat once into the right shape, and the arm says fair. Cheese follows hard, round, banded with linen, and the knife finds wedges that make sense to both buyers and cheese. No one hurries wet stone, does not reward haste. Across the square the alehouse bar sits under its beam with measures lined like soldiers, pint, quart, half-gallon, all with the town stamp on their lips. The ale taster a man who prefers temperance at work, and a clean taste after lifts a measure to the post and checks its level with a brass stick that rides a groove inside the cup. He nods and chalks one neat mark on the board. By the door. The chalk marks under old marks make ghosts of past mornings. They aren't a history, just a habit that keeps people from having to trust memory more than is healthy. At the cloth bench, the yard wand lives in a hand that has lifted wands since a time when a yard was taught by the king's measure, and then by parliament, and then by the way good wands agree with each other. Brass caps keep ends true, a line in neat figures sits at each inch. The seller sets the wand along the edge of a bolt and measures with a thumb holding the line, not a knife. Linen for shirts, fustian for trousers, a small warm twill for a child's cloak. The wand reads them all the same. A tailor leans in and presses a seam with his now later. He will press with a goose iron, but for choosing, and now tells enough. He rolls a length and ties it with tape, writes a name on a slip with a stump of pencil, and sets it aside under the stall where cloth doesn't learn dust. If your attention slides to the cross itself, the shaft, the worn steps, like a tide around a rock, nothing on the benches will change character. The beam will still find level, The wand will still find length, the chalk will still draw a polite line, no thicker than it needs to be. By the fish slab, a man lays river fish are a bed of rushes that were cut where the bank folds into backwater. The slab leans a shade to a lip so melted dew will not linger. He presses a thumb into a trout where flesh tells the truth, checks the clear of an eye, and covers the slab with a damp cloth between customers, so air won't write its own opinion across the morning. No shouting, only short words, 2 small or 1 fair. A girl nods at 1 fair, and the scale answers. He ties parcel to string, loops it over a finger, and speaks the price in a tone that doesn't ask for anything but coins. She counts from a purse that carries the smell of lavender and the shaped wear of years. Anchor, the egg candle, a vendor with a wicker basket, sets a candle behind a little horn tube polished to a window. She holds an egg to the horn. The candle shows the air cell clear near one end, and the yolk sits centered like a sun behaving. If an egg speaks trouble, it returns to the kitchen for a cake today, not a table later. She lays good eggs point end down in straw and keeps tally with a slate where each 5 makes a gate when the slate fills. She wipes with a damp cuff and starts a new field without ceremony. A man with a cart of flour halts by the steelyarder hanging scale with poise sliding along an arm cut in neat notches. He slings a sack on the hook, lifts to clear the ground, and shifts the poise until the arm sits level with its little plum. The notch tells the figure the chalk goes to sack and book. The miller's boy stands by with a cord to time ounce, a double turn, and a tuck stick. Easy to open, not easy to loosen itself on the road. The boy checks the cart's pin and nudges the linchpin's leather tie tighter. He does not do it for praise. He does it because tomorrow he doesn't want anyone to chase flour across a lane. From the shambles comes meat wrapped in cloth today. There will be stew. The butcher moves heavy things with small noises. He holds the beam hook with one hand and sets a weight with the other when the pan evens. He removes a sliver and the arm agrees. A customer asks for less, and he makes less happen without pretending it is difficult. He sharpens a knife on a steel with 3 strokes no longer than a sigh. You will not hear more than that knives that make speeches wake the day. And this is not a day for that. The sealer arrives in a plain coat with a wooden case. He sets it on the cross step, opens trays, standard weights wrapped in blue cloth, a brass yard that lives in felt, a pint of tinned brass. He tests 3 scales and 4 weights without raising an eyebrow. Everything agrees. He tests 1 weight that doesn't, it lies a whisper heavy, and he files it with a blackened file until the pointer says enough. He stamps the crown quietly and writes a short line in a book with a name and a note. He drinks a small beer at the alehouse and pays in coin with the king's head that looks like it slept badly. The sealer does not mind. He has seen worse faces on better men. If sleep leans at your shoulder, let it. The beam will hold the place in the line. The sealer's crown will bite, the wand will sit on its hook. A one here requires your attention to keep their bargains. Toward mid-morning, the sun finds a corner by the herbs and decides to be kind a while. A woman lays thyme, sage, and marjoram in bundles tied with grass. She weighs them lightly to drams and not asked for by any bean today. A pinch for 1 penny is the measure, so she counts, not weighs. In a way the old women taught her. She tucks a sprig of mint into a child's hand, because mint belongs to children and to water. The child carries it like a credential and later will crush it in a cup and think water learned manners. At the far end, the tallow chandler set thin rods across a frame and dips wicks in a pot where tallow sits at the right temperature because a hand tested it and said so. Each dip lays a skin, each skin waits the candles grow the way frost grows on a window. By patient return, he trims wicks with a knife that has learned small, decisive motions. A customer asks for 6, he ties them by their tails and weighs them as a bundle on the little scale that hangs from his finger. He says fair, and the coins say the same word back without contradiction. The clock in the Guildhall room next to the market ticks its minute. The Guildhall bench holds a book where the assize of bread used to be written in longer words on years when grain went dear. Today the baker's loaves weigh what loaves should, and the bread that left the oven at 6 stands cooling on boards under cloth. He brings 2 to the market not because he must, because someone asked for them there. He weighs a loaf out of habit, and because habits keep bigger things from wandering. Anchor, the yard gate where carriers pass. A scale by the gate weighs parcels that want to leave the town on carts, that prefer not to be asked to carry more than they wish. The carrier uses a pole to lift sacks to the hook, while his wife chalks names on a board attached to the gatepost. Names live there 4 hours, then turn to road. The board is wiped at dusk. Names return tomorrow, or a different order. The road never gets bored with that. By noon the market changes tempo. The early buyers have gone. People who live closer linger, talk small things, swap empty pots for ones with a slur of cream. A fiddler leans in the shade and plays 3 bars of something that knows the lane, and then forgets to finish it. The constable walks the square like a man who will lend a hand to lift a sack he asked, and will set a hand on a shoulder if asked by a different kind of trouble. Neither happens today. At the cloth stall, the merchant lays a small balance on the bench and weighs thread for a woman who makes lace in a window that leans 2 streets away. He takes silver with small dents. He bites 1 coin, because he was taught to do that when he was 12. It tells him nothing. He didn't know. He smiles anyway. He writes a receipt on a slip with a steel pen and sand dries the line, so the slip goes away in a pocket with a little grit that will fall out later in a drawer. If you leave your attention here and look down a side lane where sun warms the brick to honey, the square will keep working. The beam arms will not dip on the wrong side. The chalk will not add itself in error. The bell on the tower will count the hour as if it had all the time in the world. Afternoon, a shower moves across the town, so lightly that the dust does not have time to speak. Canvas tilts over stalls, weights move inward to stay dry. A grocer pours salt into a wooden bean and pulls a canvas over the top. If salt were a child that hates sudden changes. The wine shows its face once and puts it away again. A dog shakes beside the cross and decides to sleep under the cheese block, because cheese blocks have always been good to dogs. Later, the sealer returns to check the yard that hangs by the gate. He runs it under the brass standard, touches both with a finger as if they could catch a cold, and nods. He sets seal wax on 1 cap and presses a mark that will keep for another quarter if nobody teaches boys to pick at it. He closes his box, catches his hat against a gust, and goes. The last hour of market day is always gentle. The beam reads lighter things, a handful of nails in a paper twist, a little tea in a tin that the guard brought from town 2 nights ago and still smells sweet. A spool of thread that weighs nearly nothing but sits on the pan as if the pan had waited for it all morning. The egg lady counts straw, empties, the butterboard lifts. Linen goes to soak, the fish slab rinses with 2 buckets from the pump and a brush that prefers corners. Accounts settle. A woman with herbs trades 4 to candles and a half loaf. The chandler takes the herbs home to a pot that needs them. The baker takes the candles home to keep a Sunday from ignoring evening. The ledger gets a neat line that reads, like a whispered joke none of them need to explain. The cloth man wraps a remnant and gives it to the tailor's apprentice, because the boy will turn it into a cap and think of the yard wand every time he sets it straight. When stalls fold, the cobbles show rings where legs stood. The cross steps are clean again. The bell does not bother to ring. The scale pans go into a sack, weights slip into their wooden box, each in its round room, where wood remembers their diameters. The wand hangs on its hook under the bench, where night does not argue with it. The sealer stamp marks sit onto brass slips, and 1 yard cap. They look like nothing until you need them, then they are everything. Evening gives back the square to feet and the sweep. A man with a broom pushes husks and straw toward the gutter, where water chooses doorways. He finds a dropped button and sets it on a window ledge, because the person who lost it will look for it exactly there. He checks the drain grating for a stuck leaf and frees it with the toe of his boot and a patience that didn't cost him anything. He leans the broom and steps inside for a cup. The broom stands on its own, because its bristles have been treated kindly. Tools that can stand like that get treated kindly again. Night turns up 1 window at a time. The square keeps the smell of herbs and linen and a faint ghost of candle. Far down the row of houses, a child counts coins under a lamp. A penny with a nick, a half with a shine, 2 farthings worn to friends. He likes the weight. He will bring them to the market next week and learn that the beam and the wand and the chalk will treat his coins with exactly as much respect as they gave anyone else's. Tomorrow is not market day. It will still have weights in it. Bread will be weighed in a kitchen under a hand that learned how from a scale on the cross. A tailor will lay a yard wand on a table and set a chalk line with the comb of someone who has heard a bell give to notes, then one, and decided not to rush. A child will count eggs and hold one to a candle for the pleasure of the horn window more than for truth. Quiet instruments teach quiet habits. A town sleeps well when those are near. The 7th part. Mist sits low along the cut, a strip of pewter drawn through pasture. The towpath keeps its firm, narrow promised cinders and compacted clay just wide enough for a horse and the steady boots that walk beside. A milepost of cast iron leans a degree and a half, and yet means exactly what it says. Figures picked out in white, distance to a town where coal learns its markets, and to another where salt remembers brine. On the far bank a row of willows mirrors itself with the patience of old clerks. The canal looks quiet, it is. Quiet here is work done without arguments. At the lock the gates wear their day lightly. Mitre gates meet at the sill, that underwater sill that must be respected like an elder. Balance beams, long timbers with white tips stretch across the towpath side, each with a heel post that knows its socket in stone. Paddle gear stands on the coping, iron standards with racks and pinions, dog clutches and pawls. The teeth greased yesterday with tallow so the crank will speak low. A notice board says, in the voice of handwriting and rain, close paddles, mind the sill, no wasting water. No one laughs, water is counted. A boat comes up out of the mist, narrow, low, paint dulled by good behavior. The horse at the head of the line is small by cavalry standards and perfect by canal ones. Deep chest, clean bone, an eye that prefers a day with a purpose. The harness is a breast caller with hames, pad and crupper, back band and tugs to a wooden hame tug, and the tow-line hemp, spliced by hands that dislike showy knots. The boatman stands by the ell and the tiller, one hand light, one eye flicking to the off-bank, where a rope scar runs along brick under a bridge arch. The long memory of thousands of lines that took the same courteous curve. He eases the throttle on the stove in the cabin to bank the small coal. Before locking, he lifts a fender and hooks it inside the guard, so it won't learn new bruises where stone likes to visit. His wife steps forward with the short line. Their boy runs ahead with a windlass L-shaped crank, learning how to carry the weight in the crook of his arm without announcing it to his shoulders. They speak few words. The horse eases, the line droops, the boat glides into the chamber as if it had been measured just for it by a carpenter who loved straight edges. It was gate shut first, the near gate, then its mate. The beams are shouldered, not wrestled. A push at the end where iron strap meets wood, and the gate swings on its pintle, heel guided by a coined stone that has earned its rounded edges. The mitres meet with a wooden hush. Paddles next. She sets the windlass on the square of the ground paddle, lifts the pawl clear with a thumb, and winds 3 turns only, then to more, then waits. Water lifts under the boat from culverts, and the lock floor turbulence grows. The boat finds the middle, because the middle is where boats prefer to live when floors learn to speak. When the boil settles, she gives 2 more turns. No rush. A rush pound is a bad neighbour to its own gates. Anchor. We are at the balance beam. Paint flaked. White shows where palms have rested for 20 winters. A black iron handring bolts through the beam's end for a man on a wet day today is merely damp, and no one needs it. The beam's heel ferrule sits in its socket with the felt of grease and silt between. The post timbers are oak, the caps are iron, the pins are something a good smith made with attention. The sill marker, a white board on the coping, reminds anyone who stands too near the tail where danger begins. The board has saved more boats than any sermon. Up she comes. The chamber level rises with a patience learned from millpens. Rope lies ready for a snub if the bow thinks of getting ahead of itself. It does not. The keeper this stretch has won, though most locks are unmanned, arrives with a mug and watches without pretending to supervise. He notes the boat's name in his pocket book, not because he doubts the family, because he likes a book to show a life when winter asks it to. He glances at the bywasher side channel that carries excess without drama and moves a single twig with his boot, so the flow won't teach itself to whistle where the bridge stone is cracked. The gates at the head open with the same measured shoulder. The horse steps forward as if he had been cued by a string no one can see. The boat glides out, rope lifting, fender returning to its habit. The boy swings the bridge that keeps the path whole, an iron deck that pivots on a pin so the horse can cross to the offside for the next pound where the towpath lives. He drops a toe under the deck edge to help it down without letting it clank. Quiet is a courtesy you can learn at 10. If your attention falls away a little here, nothing at all will complain. The pawl will click, the rack will rest, the water will stand where it meant to. The horse will take 3 more breaths before slowly building his walk. The boat will keep its nose straight like a polite guest at a long table. A mile on, a change bridge. Stone ramp to an arch that crosses the cut and back to the same bank, an elegant way of not asking a horse to step across water it cannot respect. Rope marks on the inside of the arch give the arch a dark eyebrow, so someone set a rope guard there last year. A curved iron to save both ropes and stone. The guard carries fresh scratches, like tiny honest medals. The boatman eases the ellum, and the bow reads the curve, the line which might catch. Does not, the horse goes over, and returns to the towpath he began on. No one speaks, the bridge does the talking. Anchor, the toll office at the junction. Brick box, iron roof, a window that faces the water with an air that says, we are on the same side as numbers. Inside, a clerk with a gauging rod steps onto the cabin roof with the good permission of the boatwoman and dips the rod into the cut alongside the hold. The rod wears brass studs, and a table in his book converts inches of sinkage to tons of coal. Boats are gauged once when new, and the measurements live in the clerk's tables for as long as wood behaves. He reads, subtracts what's lighter than last time, and writes a toll neat enough to be proud of. He stamps a ticket. The stamp is not grand, but it stays stamped even in rain. The boatwoman pays in coin in a bag that used to carry tea and now smells like iron and wool. The clerk sets the ticket on a nail for the inspector if he wanders by, and takes it down again when the boat slides. By noon the tunnel mouth shows ahead, a dark letterbox cut in a hill that does not respect canals unless asked correctly. No towpath within the horse's line drops and coils. The horse goes round by the tunnel keeper's stable and waits at the far end. If the hill is generous to his legs, not today, the horse rests and eats with a muslin against flies, while men leg the boat through. Boards line the tunnel wall at shin height. Men lie on their backs on planks across the bow and push with their feet, walking the boat along the brick. To men together, breath matched, one call every 20 yards to keep rhythm honest. The boat drifts, the air cools, the cabin range ticks faint metal as the flame minders down. A lamp hangs from the cratchboard. In its hoop its flame thinks of singing and decides to stay quiet. The tunnel roof closes in a little where brick shifted and was taught better with an iron strap and good lime. Distance is measured here by sound and by patience, not by anything a watch admits. Outside again, the tow rope goes back on the hames. The horse steps to work with the relief a man feels when a long corridor opens into open air. A milepost now says less to one town and more to another. The figures are flipped because a boat sees the world from both ends in one day. On the off-bank, a pumping station lifts water from a river to the summit pound. When summer speaks dry, its beam rises and falls. Hiss at the bucket end, flywheel cutting a line in air. The brickwork is cleaned. Someone loves this engine with a cloth. The boat stops for dinner at a wharf where Sacs live. Mooring. The bowline goes to a ring in the coping, once around, and a short hitch, not a knot that makes enemies with itself. The stern line takes a turn on a timber head and then goes back aboard, because men who like mornings to begin without curses do not leave lines to learn to bite themselves. A boy takes the snubber, a short length of rope to wrap a post if a boat needs to break without trusting its knees, and fits it around a bollard to show he remembers. The boatwoman pulls a kettle from the range. and sets thee to think about it. A pan warms yesterday's stew, until it remembers, it is good again. The horse receives his nosebag, and the gift of a hand rub where collars go. He likes that better than most speeches. Anchor, the stop planks and grooves near a bridge. Oak grooves in the bank. Take thick planks, one by one, drop them with a head rope and lugs to hold. And a pound can be emptied for a repair without teaching the whole canal to go dry. The keeper has the planks stacked under a tarpaulin and a crowbar that fits them. He lifts one half out to show a boy how a woodworm lives and how oil persuades iron to give without sulks. The boy nods and secretly hopes to be asked to put them in one day. When a gate gets an idea of leaving, he will be. Afternoon brings a railway bridge, new over old. The skew arch sets bricks at angles that would have made a lazier mason's eye water. These were set by a patient man with a template and a willingness to begin again for curve misbehaved. A boat length white on the brick, right at the waterline, shows a place where frost taught a lesson. To winters past, a mason taught frost to behave with fresh joints and a trowel that fits his hand like the windlass fits a hand at the lock. Discipline in materials looks like kindness when done well. At the next flight, the keeper's garden stands neat beans tied to hazel, a plum trained flat on warm brick, a water but tapped from the bywash. He carries a spare windlass with a socket patched and a pull spring saved from a gear that grew tired. He sets one gate for them before they ask, a generosity not mentioned, and shakes the last gnats from his hat before he welcomes the boat up. They work the flight steady. Ground paddles up half, gate paddles after boats meeting halfway, where pounds stagger like steps in a staircase, one up, one down. Water neither wasted nor asked to travel any farther than it must. A boy on the opposite side closes a gate behind the down boat with both hands, leaning his weight in a way that makes a lock beam proud of him. If your attention strays across to a meadow where haycocks sit like small brown bells, you won't miss the important part. The poles will hold, the beams will swing, a windlass will clack just enough to be comforting and then stop. In late afternoon, a gauging stop for a different canal company that presents a stop lock, a short chamber with only a foot of fall and gates at both ends. Companies met here and distrusted one another's water. The lock makes peace and a small fee. The keeper levels them across with half a paddle, stares at the tails of both gates as if they could confess to thieving water. He signs a book and the boat slides through. The boatman grins because the keeper pretends to be serious and then lets the grin live in his eyes as if a child had told a joke that deserved a supper. A lift bridge stands ahead, deck and counterweight. The boy unlatches, the bridge floats up gentle, and the horse walks forward under with his head dropping, because horses are wise about deck edges. A woman on a bicycle stops and watches and thinks this is older than she is, and newer than she imagined at the same time. She thanks no one, thanks would wake something. She smiles and pedals on. Anchor, the day's last mooring by a wharf tree. A ring in the stone, a short line fenders down again, the elm laid along the cabin top, under its tarpaulin, the chimney cap set against night, the cratch cloth tidded the cabin doors shut, so heat stays. The horse stands in a line stall under a thatch built for the purpose low, sweet with hay, broomed clean, nose bag again, water in a half barrel that never goes empty on this length, because the keeper has a habit, and that habit keeps thirst out of the book. Inside the boatman's cabin, the range does its small best, an iron box with an oven that takes a mind to coax and a plate where a kettle sits snug. The range guard holds 3 tins to our tea. One is polished stove black that makes pride smell like paraffin and lamp wick. Painted panels show roses and castles, not because the boat floats through such places, but because brass and iron like company and strong colour keep spirits steady. Above the crossbed, a lace runner keeps soot from presuming. The table flap folds down and admits plates and bread and the knife that clacks softly because it was sharpened on a stone that likes doing its job. Outside, the keeper walks the pounds once more. He lifts a bywash grate with a hook and clears the leaves and the lost glove. He taps the balance beam of a gate with his boot and listens for the hollow that says the heel post is sound. He checks the paddle gear pulls with a poke of a stick and leaves a note on the toll clerk's door about the squeak at the second lock rack. He shuts the stable door against weather that has yet to declare itself, and looks at the milepost, because iron mileposts like to be looked at. Then he pretends that's nonsense and goes in for a mug. The towpath settles. Footprints soften bicycle tires draw to scripts, and then go unread. A terrier briskly writes its name in dust and leaves it. The water reflects a star where a ripple chooses to rest. A bat folds the air and opens it again. The rope marks on the bridge arch wait for tomorrow. The notice board waits for nobody in particular. The windlass on the cabin roof waits where the boy left it. Socket cleaned with a rag that knew its duty. No speeches here, only small rules that keep along. Wet line useful. Open ground before gate, close gate before ground. When running down mind, the sill mind your fingers. Never let a line wrap where a body part prefers to live snub. Don't yank, wait a minute when water tells you it prefers you to. The canal belongs to such rules and grows kindly on them. Morning will give the horse a walk. Before sun thinks to complain, the windlass will climb its first square. The beam will bend and come back. A rope will dip and lift. A tunnel will take to breaths to enter. A clerk will measure a boat's honesty with a rod and a habit. People will eat bread that came by water without telling it so. England holds together on many beams, some of them float. The eighth part. Dawn opens the harbour with a pale hinge. The tide is on the make, smooth-backed, pushing a quiet gloss between stone quays that have learned every sort of foot. Tar in the seams of the pier stones warms a breath before the sun reaches. It ropes where last night's dew like a thought they will drop when it suits them. Near the stairs that lead down to the water, a painted board shows numbers you can read from a bow-tied feet picked out in white. A yard beyond, a timber staff carries a second raw black and white bands, so even a hurried eye knows where the morning stands. The water touches 4, thinks a minute, then agrees on 5. The harbour office door opens. A man in a blue coat and a knitted watch cap sets his ledger on the sill and rubs a thumb across the chalk schedule on the slate. High water, low water, and the slack between. Written yesterday from the almanac and confirmed by a habit of listening. He adds one short line, bar clear. The line means dredge spoil was tipped last week, where it should be. It also means no one needs to invent cleverness at the outer channel today. He puts the chalk in its saucer as if chalk could bruise. By the nearest bollardian mushroom with a smooth crown, from rope's complement stew, hands make a short eye splice in a new hawser. The strands open, tuck a marlin spike levers. Without bad language, a palm strap saves a hand from triumphs it does not need. When the splice sits, they roll it underfoot and dress it with a stroke of tallow so fibers learn obedience without feeling scolded. The hawser's bitter end carries a whipping neat enough to wear on Sunday. It is not for Sunday, but pride likes to visit weekdays if allowed a chair. Anchor. We are at the tide board. The painted numbers stand still, the water does not. A slight set in the surface runs across the mouth of the inner basin. Easy to read if you've learned how the light bends on a push. A boy in a jersey shoulders, still learning their width, counts pier steps below him. 13 wet, 4 dry. He says nothing. He files the counts with the other firm things in his head. How many turns a capstan wants. How long the topmast stay takes to settle in a new splice. The tide ticks. The slate in the harbour office agrees. The boy is right. He usually is, because he has been allowed to be wrong enough times to cure it. Capstan work starts a day as neatly as bread. A small ketch lies alongside the outer quay where the depth keeps its promises. A timber head takes a turn from her stern line forward. 4 bars stand ready in the capstan. Men set shoulders and step in time, no chant, no display, just the sound of wood underhand and boot on planks. Poles drop with a small raw-abiding click. The ketch comes in the thumb's thickness. She needs to sit square. The mate snubs the forward line and lifts a palm in a circle easy. Bars come out, poles settle. The capstan remembers everything in silence. Across the basin, a hand crane straddles a timber pile. Its iron spine and wooden jib know the weight of a barrel without being told. A hook takes a strop around a cask The pull on the ratchet sings a note in thirds. The barrel leaves the cobbles just enough, swings in under a watchful palm, and sets to the hold where chocks wait. The mate chalks the cask head with a mark. He and a beer understand the chalk rights dry and true, not to bold. He covers the mark with a touch of wax, so sweat won't practice mischief later. Above, a goal considers a speech and forgets it. A pilot cutter ghosting him from the south floats like good advice. The cutter's tan sail breathes twice as she rounds up. The pilot steps into the dinghy with the practiced laziness of a man who saves the show for the one thing that asks for it: timing. His lead line coils in the bottom, marks in cloth: white 4-2, blue 4-3, red 4-5, and a bit of leather at 10 tied by hands that tied the old pilot's lines before him. He passes the ketch and tips his cap. He does not shout. He looks as if the channel made itself available just because he looked at it right. Anchor, the range marks. Today marks stand on shore one low, one high, painted boards on stout posts that keep their faces clean. Set the low under the high, and you are on the fairway. Let them separate, and you are beginning a conversation with a bank that has never learned diplomacy. At the very mouth, two white beacons wink through the morning haze, and when dusk comes, their lanterns fixed, not revolved, will keep a line for anyone who minds small rules. This harbour isn't big enough for grand lights, it's big enough for accuracy. The pilot takes a yawl out to a brig waiting in the roads, her topsails scandalised to hover where the anchor holds. He springs aboard from the lee chains with a rope end in hand, not because anyone doubts he can, because a rope end belongs in a hand that leaps. On the quarterdeck, there is the brief grammar of names and draft. Then the pilot leans to the binnacle, nods at the card, and says 4 numbers under his breath that are not arithmetic, only headings he has met before and is pleased to meet again. He calls the leadsman forward. The line runs and splashes. By the mark 5, a pause, and a quarter less 6. The brig nods politely and comes on. The lead sings again, wet leather against wet oak, and no one thinks this is poetry, because it is useful, which is better. Inside the harbour, a floating gate lies across a basin where ships sit all day at one water. A man at the control house watches a simple gauge river on one side, dock on the other, and opens the sill valves, the inch that brings the two to agreement. Only then will he lift the gate. The gate itself is nothing to look at, a wall with a hinge that lies at the bottom and a habit of being heavy. But it is a friend to keels that would otherwise make a habit of mud. He notes the time on a card. Dock gate up 6:42. He notes it for himself, for the engineer who likes histories, and for the habit that saves men from telling the same story twice. If your attention drifts along the quay to the stack of wooden fenders waiting under a tarred cloth, nothing will miss you. The pilot will set his headings, the leadsman will sing his honest fractions, the gate will meet its own idea at the moment it should. The tide will add an inch that will make no speech, and all the difference. On the outer mole, 2 men lift a red canvas cone on a mast. The cone points down. Every boat in sight, awake or drowsy, reads the sign the way you read a face that says wind with tide. Later, if it turns, the cone will point upwind against tide, and a different sort of day begins. There is also a ball to hoist 4-bar closed. If swell thinks itself mayor today, no ball shows. A harbour with modest signals and honest habits doesn't need to shout. Anchor, the tide tables. In the office, the almanac lies open to the right page. A brass divider set rests in the gutter of the book, a small pencil, the kind that leaves a dependable grey. Not too hard. Not a smudge sits in the wire on the page's edge. The master writes a correction for today's pressure to lines down. One to the right hand circles the slack water window with a light hand. On the sill, the time ball mast in the distance can be seen faint over roofs. At 1 o'clock it will drop, and the town's chronometers will behave. The pilot nods at the mast as he passes the window, though it is not yet time to nod at it. By mid-morning the quay turns into a set of remembered hands. Bales of wool move onto wheeled hand trucks with iron tires that prefer not to be hurried. Crates of clay pipes find a corner of the shed where drafts will not teach them a song. A cooper taps a hoop down on a water cask and listens for that small right note. A custom house clerk very careful and quite human. Checks a tally against a manifest and draws a line through one duplication with a pleasure. He does not show to colleagues, because their pleasures are their business. He sands the ink, taps the paper, and files it in a pigeonhole that knows its number. Above the harbour, the lighthouse keeper walks the steps. The tower is not high enough to give sweeps and novels, it is high enough to do the work. The staircase curls around a cylinder like a ribbon that hates drama. At the lantern room, glass panes show the sea in ordered diamonds. Brass fittings keep their colour, because hands keep their word. A Fresnel lens sits like a stack of clear leaves, prisms catching what the lamp will give them and laying it flat across water, without waste. The keeper opens the lamp's gallery door, trims the wick with a steady pair of spring shears, and wipes the char from the burner cone with a cloth that has never seen grit. He polishes a section of prism with whiting on washed chamois. His motion is small, circular, and done without voices. Down a shaft, a weight on a chain waits to fall when evening comes, so the lens will revolve in slow arithmetic. He sets the winding handle once, not because the weight is low, because the habit is good. He checks the oil colza, thick and kind, and tops the reservoir, so no one will feel clever at midnight. He dew screens one pane with his breath and sees where a streak pretended to be invisible. It stops pretending. He looks along the bearings. A drop of watch oil finds the one point that asked politely a week ago and was told to wait until today. He nods at the clock that holds the strike for the bell. He sets its pendulum a breath shorter because he heard 5 seconds of ambition last night. The bell will not ring hard, just enough for Fog to know it is accounted for. Fog likes being accounted for. If you nap half a minute on that bench under the inner stair where paint smells like order, the lens will continue to be clean. The wick will sit at the right height and not sulk. The clock will neither gain nor lose an unworried second. At 1, the time ball drops. Down at the quay, a ship's mate stands with a sextant case open. Though the sextant sits aside, no sun to shoot through cloud, only the chronometer to bring to heel. The ball falls the measured way. All good things do no lunge, only a precise descent. The mate notes the second on his card, makes the correction, and wraps the chronometer again in baize that smells of oil and wool. He closes the case and touches it once, the way men touch family coats in passing. The wind in the rigging neither applauds nor complains. Anchor, the daymarks again, in slanting noonlight. A painter on the outer bank leans from a ladder and refreshes the white on the lower board. He works in rectangles and does not drip. He sets the brush in a tin and ties the ladder at the head when he shifts down one rung, because a tin and the ladder like to make plans if left to themselves. The range stays true. He climbs down, looks from the end of his thumb along the line to the high board, and nods. He does not ask for a witness. By afternoon, the basing gate lifts again, and a small barge slides into the locked water to lie against the timber wharf where cargo waits that prefers one level. The keeper raises a hand for steady, and the barge knows the hand. A bollard takes to round turns, and a figure 8 bite lies ready for a quick let go. Later the end stays on the bits, because ends that leave their ships forget themselves. A shore crane ratchet and fly walks its hook up. A crate rises, swings, and sets with a thud that is all arrival and no surprise. On the outer side, 2 men bend the canvas cone back into its bag and hoist the cylinder. Wind shift, new tide. The cone is easy, the cylinder a little more reluctant. They like the small negotiation, the way a mast's lanyard answers a half turn. They settle the halyard, cleat it, and rub their palms like men who have shaken hands with rope and were improved by it. A coastguard walks the wall. His glass hangs. His pace does not hurry. He stops at the flagstaff by the station and looks through his glass at a cutter 3 miles off that probably needs no message. The semaphore arms stay folded. He writes a single line in the log, because logs are better than memory. When a cold February says, "What happened last June?" He watches a child at the steps pick up a piece of driftwood and put it down where it cannot trip anyone, and thinks better of the world for a moment out loud to no one. If you drift toward the tarred nets drying on a long line, each cork float like a little moon. Nothing essential will leave you. The nets will go on surrendering water. The floats will keep their balance. The knots will remain a little honest grammar. They always were sheep bends and clove hitches doing what they were taught. Toward evening, the lighthouse keeper returns. He winds the clockwork weight until his shoulders tell him, without boasting, that it is enough for a night and a half. He opens the oil valve, tests the wick's trim with a whisper of a turn, and sets the strike for the bell if sea asks. He steps onto the gallery, shuts a ventilator against a fickle draught that taught him a lesson once, and looks along the coast until daymarks fade and small house windows take their turn as stars of a sort. Back inside, he strikes the lamp, flame catches and rounds. The lens begins its measured walk, laying a soft bright path where the harbour meets the open. The light shows white on the tide board and gently on the iron of the bollards that shone earlier for work. Now they shine like well-kept thoughts. Down on the quay, the last hooks stow. A man ties a clove hitch or a key ring and sets a half hitch in front as if to say, stay, but only as long as you need. Another squares a hatch with a bar and lays the bar under the coaming, because bars left loose practice theft by rolling. The crane's pull relaxes into its rest, as if it had learned tiredness. It has not it on as discipline. The pilot walks up the steps with his lead line coiled in the one way that keeps the marks readable. He sets it on the peg inside his door and puts the peg's shadow back where it belongs with a lamp on the table. The slate in the office shows to new lines. Bar steady, next tide, 6:01. The harbour master draws one underline under each single, without flourish. Night holds water the way a bowl holds water. Simply, the lamp keeps its circle. The bell touches its clapper once, as if to make sure it remembers the speech for fork, and then lets it rest. A cat patrols along the stacked fenders and pretends it is on business. It is. The tide board is a black panel with numbers the night does not read. It does not need to. The numbers will be there in the morning. Morning will be where it should. The daymarks stand dark, useful even so, because shapes matter before colours. The time ball mast is nothing but a line. Now the chronometers sleep with their own opinion. No one here asks for applause. A lead line dry in the morning, all the applause a pilot wants. A lens without streaks is all a keeper needs. A slate with two lines that were true last tide and will be true next is how a harbour sleeps. The ninth part. Dawn reaches the station before the first passengers. The platform lamps wear small glass chimneys that remember paraffin, and a careful hand, their last glow gives way to a thin stripe of sky behind the goods shed. On the upline, fish plates show a dark seam between rails, each joint bolted with a plain, honest cross. The ballast smells faintly of dust kept in good order. A white painted post holds the yard limit board at the throat of the points, a modest rule that keeps shunting from thinking it is the main line. The station clock agrees with its own face, and with the watch in the porter's pocket. Agreement is how a day learns to be tidy. Up the stair to the signal box, steps rise in a narrow stack of pitch pine. The door carries a brass plate and opens on warm wood and the long iron frame. Levers in a proud row, each topped with colour: red for stop, yellow for distant, black for points, blue for facing point lock. Their numbers run left to right in enamel, the sort that forgives fingers. Steel tappets and locking bars live down in the dogleg of the frame. Out of sight, but not out of mind, they speak in clicks and refusals that keep men from doing things in the wrong order. It is a grammar that has saved more lives than speeches. On the shelf above the levers sit the instruments, a pair of block bells and the two needle indicators that carry a simple alphabet between this box and the next. Their faces show words that hold trains still or let them go. Line clear, train on line, train out of section. Beside them the train register book lies open, ruled and numbered, a pencil resting in its groove. The signalman hangs his coat on the same nail he has always used, checks the oil in the lamp case, and trims one wick with a small bladed tool, because lamps like to be ready even when the sun is up. Anchor. We are at the lever frame. The first move is not a pull, it is a touch on the block plunger and a note on the bell. To short, one long, is lying clear. A pause. The distant box answers with the same. then turns its needle to line clear. Our man writes the time in the register and rolls his thumb over the near levers. Porcelain cap no. 5. Home signal waiting for the timetable's minute to arrive like a well-brought-up guest. He pulls the distant first. Yellow shoulder coming down with a smooth, damp swing. Then the facing point lock slides. Then the points, only then the red arm rises. The interlocking agrees with him because he agreed with it first. Down the yard, the shunter walks with a staff under long pole that ends in a hook. He lifts couplings with the hook's tip, never his hands, an easy slack by voice and gesture. 3 wagons come off the goods loop and meet a brake van, whose stove has made up its mind to be helpful. The guard checks his tail lamp glass clean, red bright, oil cup filled, and hangs it on the left hook, because the right hook wobbles when cold. He chalks a mark on the van plank, just a number and a letter, and stands where he can see both the shunter and the signal doll on the post. The doll's arm holds, then lifts. He climbs aboard without hurry and sets his hand to the wheel that tightens the brake screw. Wood blocks kiss iron, then let go. Squeal is 4 boys here. The brake makes a low, polite song. At the water column by the end of the platform, a tank sits on brick legs, an arm folded like a bird at rest. The tank wears white numbers that tell a fireman how full it is. A tender noses under the arm swings. The leathered bag drops, a chain clinks. Water falls in a thick, steady column that hits coal with a sound between rain and bread. The fireman watches the glass. He keeps the lip high enough that it does not lash and low enough that it does not throw a tantrum. He closes the valve, folds the arm, and wipes the bag with his sleeve out of respect, not fuss. The driver walks his engine. He carries a hammer and taps each wheel boss in turn. True rings answer from sound metal. Any dull reply would start a different day. He checks springs for a broken leaf, rods for warm brasses, the big ends for the thin oil line that means the trimmings are feeding. He looks to the injectors, the clack valves that feed water to boiler, and cracks one to hear the steady hiss that says no grit is sulking under a seat. He rakes the ash pan clear. The clinker falls into the pit and gets quenched with a watering can, because steam likes to meet kindness, not surprise. He trims the fire with the dart, pulling a tongue here, pushing a piece there, so air will find its way like a good plan without needing heroics. He shuts the fire door softly. If your attention rests a while on the polished brass of the reverser quadrant and the way the handle sits at mid-gear, while the driver fusses with small checks, nothing urgent will move without you. The gauge glass will hold its inch beyond half, the safety valves will sit quiet, the brake pipe will maintain its small, contented whisper. On the down platform, parcels weigh in on a beam with iron pans and domed weights stamped true. The porter writes fragile on a timber tea chest, thinner than a promise, and pads its corners with sacking. He wheels a barrow over the crossing at the end, where white lines tell boots to look and listen. He does both, so do wheels. A woman in a bonnet asks, after a hat box, that has seen too much railway. The porter produces it unbruised. He will say, later, that this box learned its manners somewhere else and only came here to show off. For now, he smiles and lets the woman teach the box to follow instructions. Anchor, the telegraph table, a small key, a sounder, a line of pins. The clerk sits by the office window and taps a short message, wagon numbers, and a request for a spare brake stick to be sent up on the afternoon pickup. The line answers with a burr and a clack. He folds the paper with one hand and puts it under a paperweight that is a lump of glass with a ship trapped in it on purpose. He marks the book with a number and a neat initial that proves later it was him. The long needles on the timepiece make their slow, reliable tour. The first passenger train arrives as if time itself were its guard. A light whistle shows, hardly more than breath, enough to say, I am here, to a yard that already knew it. The home arm falls. Then the starter, the driver eases the regulator, and the robe of steam lifts and vanishes. The carriages drift by with windows reflecting hedges, and a man reading with his finger. The brake shoes kiss iron once as the train eases and stop where the porters hoped. Doors open with a polite complaint. A child counts carriages aloud and loses count for pleasure more than failure. A guard steps to the platform and inspects the tail lamp, then the coupling. He sets his watch with a glance at the clock and writes a time on the paper, behind the clip that lives in his pocket. The signalman restores his road, red to danger, points normal, lock home, distant to caution, tap on the bell and a turn of the plunger. Train out of section. The down box answers, needles return to normal. The register takes the time. The pencil goes back to its groove. He pours tea from a brown pot that sits on a small iron stove in the corner. The stove ticks as it changes mind about heat. The iron settles, the box smells of tea and oil and wood planed a long time ago. A set of wagons needs weighing. Beyond the goods shed a weighing machine sits under a roof, its platform resting on levers that speak to a dial behind glass. The shunter eases a wagon on until the pointer sits steady. The clerk reads the number, writes it in a list already half filled, and chalks the tear on the plank end, 3 figures and a letter. He notes the load call now, but last week barrels of something that preferred not to be described in polite company, and presses the paper under a clip knot to a post that somehow has always known where papers want to be. Anchor, the point rodding, along the 6-foot, bright rods running chairs, turning 90 degrees through cast cranks, tensioned with turnbuckles backed off half a nut for summer. Signal wires run along beside on rollers, galvanized steel, lightly greased, catching the light like quiet water. A fitter in a brown coat checks a compensator with his spanner, ensures the little balance arm sits level, and drops one felt pad over a roller that squeaked yesterday and has no such plans today. He lifts a lid on a facing point lock, brushes out grit with a paintbrush kept just for brushing, and shuts the lid with a small charm. He says under his breath, because old hands teach new hands, that small charms are a kind of grease. The day warms. A ballast train rattles slowly through, a crane in its middle with a timber jib and the capstan that turns by human patience. It stops under the bridge where stone-flaked last frost men lift a slab, set it firm, and tamp with iron face poles to the rhythm a heart likes. The ganger looks along the line, eye low, and sees the slight left that ought to be level. He nods to the man with the shovel who has already seen it and corrected it, while being nodded at. The crane slews, sets down its hook, and the guard signs a slip for the stone, if stone had its own accounts. It does. If you doze a breath here, nothing will object. The distance at caution will remain a responsible rumour. The home will refuse to fall until it should. The box bell will keep its small conversations with the next box, the way neighbours share milk and reports of weather. Midday brings the pickup goods. The driver leans out at the yard mouth. The shunter shows a board with a number that agrees with the wagon's chalk. The signalman sets the road into the loop. The facing point lock levers go in, then the points. The engine eases through. Coupling hooks lift and fall. Hand points clank. A guard's van lurches, and then remembers its manners. A tarpaulin gets pulled square and battened with batten sticks. Ropes take to turns, and one good hitch a sheet number is chalked where the book likes it. A crate bears a red diagonal that most men humour and some ignore today. It is humoured because ignoring is lazy, and lazy is not this yard's way. On the engine, the fireman uses the long pricker to open air through the grate. The driver sets the injector and watches the water climb back to a sensible place in the glass. He takes a rag to the cab brass, not to make it shine, to keep grime from turning to a pigment no one invited. He oils the link pins and feels their warmth say enough. He leans his ear to the motion and hears only the annoying little chatter that means the crosshead would like a quarter turn on its oil cap. He obliges, and the chatter becomes a purr. He sets the blower a whisper to keep the fire alive while the regulator rests. Anchor, the token instrument for the single line beyond. In the office, a mahogany case holds to brass tubes and a window with a needle. The clerk speaks to the next office by the instrument's own bell code when both admit the line is clear. The machine allows a token brass hoop with a stamp plate to be withdrawn. Only one lives on the line at a time. The driver will hang it on his arm and give it to the next man along. The hoop is scratched by years of obedience. It is a simple Brilliant fence for invisible fields. Afternoon eases. The platform sees a slow train with wagons for cattle at the rear. Their slatted sides make an honest pattern. A boy counts spokes. A woman holds a paper parcel to her chest, as if the paper could feel. The guard steps to the gate, opens it, and lets the beast out with the calm of a man whose boots no footing in any season. He writes a note in his book with a stump of pencil thick as a thumb, and tucks the pencil behind his ear, where it has lived since before breakfast. The signalman keeps his book clean. He writes each train, each time, each small remark. Fog patches. Will tapper attending at 2. Sparrow's nest removed from up distant post. He smiles at the last line and keeps it, because next spring the same thing will happen, and a line in last year's book will remind him that habits belong not only to people. Toward evening, a locomotive takes the turntable behind the shed. 2 men push the bar iron wheels roll on a ring of rails set in a circle that remembers the center. The table comes level with the lead and clicks into its socket. The driver brings the engine on until the balance feels like a table that has learned to float. He shuts the regulator, sets the brake, and lets the fire think about a smaller life. They turn the table with the steady walking of men who prefer smooth to fast. The engine points the other way and seems satisfied that the world has choices. The lampman does his round. He lifts the ladder to the distant post, shoulder under the rung, to finding the lower step without looking habit puts him there safely every evening. Up he goes, the lamp door opens. With a careful hand wick gets trimmed to a neat round, glass wiped with a soft cloth, reservoir checked, cap set back without a click. Down again the ladder moves, the home gets the same, the starter, 2. He finishes at the platform, checking carriage lamps and a tail lamp that nodded a little today and might like a tighter screw. He turns it twice and the lamp nods no more. He wipes a smudge from his cheek with a sleeve that has seen every colour oil cares to be and none it likes to boast about. If you set your attention down on the bench by the parcels office and let your eyes half close, the station will still keep time. The bell will still say to short, 1 long. The needle will still swing to train on line and back. The lever will still resist a hand until another lever has done its duty. Dusk brings a last arrival from the branch. Children have fallen asleep in that carriage, their heads lean together like books shelved for the night. The guard handles the token as if it were both a tall and a small, decent ceremonial. He hands it to the clerk, who places it into the tube and locks it away with a punch that sounds like a decision. The clerk writes the time, draws a line, adds his initials. He straightens the book on the desk, and the weight of the day sits square. The signalman offers line clear to the next box for the evening goods. The bell answers, the levers move in their order, the arms go off, the rails gleam once like wet slate, then the train rolls and the gleam changes to a memory you can trust. Behind, the old home arm rises back to caution, and the dog in the porter's hut sighs in a way that says he has no more business until morning. Night settles on the yard with a dry kind of quiet. The ash pit smokes less, and then not at all. The tank's ladder holds a line of dew. The box window shows a warm patch of light on levers that stand like a row of thoughtful men. The platform clock keeps its slow, honest circle. A page in the register is full and looks like work that happened properly. The last entry sits neat as the first, the pencil line as firm. The signalman caps the inkwell, turns down the stove, and rests his palm for a second on the porcelain of no. 5 habit, gratitude, not superstition. Tomorrow the bell will ask the next question, the needle will answer the points, will move the block, will protect a driver, will tap a wheel, and hear the word he wants water, will fall into a tender lamps, will learn their own small. Sons and a book will remember it all in lines that never had to shout. The 10th part. Morning begins in a long, narrow world. The road walk runs straight as a ruled line between brick sheds and a hedge that minds the wind. 200 yards of covered way, timber posts, and a weathered roof, a sand floor that keeps its temper a faint, resin-sweet smell from yesterday's work. At the near end stands the forehouse with its hackling bench and breaker at the far end. small as a postage stamp at this hour. A traveller waits on iron wheels. The distance is not for pride, it is for twist the simple arithmetic of turning many small things into one good thing without asking them to fight. In the forehouse, hemp lies in bundles line for the best. Tow 4 coarse jobs bound with 2 loops and a habit of being useful. A break a row of long steel teeth, set in oak opens a bundle the hand that feeds it knows just how hard to pull, so the fibers lengthen, not tear. Then the hackle combs, finer teeth in 3 grades, each drawing out shibs and small bragging bits, each leaving a ribbon that shines lightly when laid on the bench. The hackler's palm tests for evenness, the way a baker tests a dough to many short ends, make a rope that pouts under strain. Too much pride in long fibre makes a rope that dislikes knots. Balance is the aim, not a sermon. He builds slivers by hand, small ribbons weighed by feel, and lays them into a can for the spinner. The spinner takes a distaff like a wheelwoman does, but here the wheel is a foot-powered flyer with hooks, jack screws, and a fore-end with little 4-armed heads. He ties on, sets the foot to its treadle, and walks up the sliver to make a thread that remembers strength without forgetting kindness. 3 spindles feed onto bobbins, stack in a rack. A boy rubs a hint of tallow on the thread as it winds, so later, when many threads meet, they will learn manners quickly. His fingers hold the grease without becoming its friend. A bucket of warm soap and sand by the door will make the parting easy when the bell rings. Anchor. We are at the stretching posts, shoulder high uprights with iron eyes. Today's order chalked on a board. Anchor cable, 10-inch, 90 fathoms. Served also. Bolt rope for sailmaker, 30 fathoms, 2-inch. A fathom board to brass capped pegs, 6 feet apart on a plank, leans nearby a line thrown round peg to peg. Counted by hand over hand. Gives length without figures that argue. The foreman clips a sheet of paper under a pin. The cables lay left-handed. 3 strands to a hawser. 3 hawsers to a cable laid rope. 9 threads of decision, trust. He taps the chalk twice, not impatience habit. The first step for the big work is strands. At the walk's head, a row of hooks on a shaft. Horse heads wait for 3 bundles of spun yarn. The man at the jack turns a wheel. Hooks spin, the strands begin to twist. Along the roof, a line of fair leads keeps them from wandering on the sand. The traveller rolls, keeping tension without argument. A boy with a brake cord stands by the traveller. He lays the cord over the axle and leans when the foreman says so. Enough to hold back, not enough to scold. Twist climbs from hooks to traveller fibres, lean into their new pasture, like men setting to a barge. When each strand holds its count, there is a tally stick with notches, and the thumb that knows when to stop. The foreman lifts a hand, and all motion quiets in one breath. Strands are brought together for closing. The foreman shifts the lay. If the strands were spun Z, the rope will be laid S. You cannot make a fair mind by agreeing in everything. The top are grooved wooden cone rides down between them on a rod, pressing and placing, convincing threads to sit beside one another without stepping on toes. The traveller moves toward the head now, because tension is in one direction and persuasion in the other. Arms on the jack turn with a hum. The rope fattens. The top chatters once, and then decides to purr. If you step outside your attention for a small while and watch a swallow flirt with the hedge, nothing here will sulk. The jack will keep its turn. The traveller will walk. The top will do its modest dance. The sand underfoot will remember every rope that passed and complain to nobody about it. Halfway down the walk, a splice bench waits for later to posts and a pin for an eye. A marlin spike the size of a generous carrot, serving mallets hung from a row of pegs. A coil of spun yarn, small stuff sits like a sleeping cat. On the wall hangs a cracking whip. For tar-potted lines, no whip crack here. It is only a name for the tool that pays out a cord as it goes into warm tar. The tar pot itself warms in the tarring shed. Pine tar simmered to a temperature a hand can judge with a stick. Draw the stick, count to 4. Read the thread to thin, and it drips into shoes to thick, and it cracks in winter. Anchor. The tar house. A brick room with a vented roof, and a flue cast iron kettle rides over a small furnace. Smoke persuaded up by sense, not rage. The tarman tests with a thermometer now, and then because a head and a stick love company, he draws a strand through with the lad's help-gloved hands, aprons that tell stories only to soap and brushes. They hang the black line on a spar, touch off drips with the back of a knife, and let the shine turn to a friendly dull. Tar behaves like a patient teacher. It insists, it protects, it never apologizes for being itself. Back in the walk, the hawser lies complete. To men in aprons lift with hooks and give it a roll onto the floor, because a rope prefers to meet its next step not by surprise. 3 such hawsers will become a cable-laid rope. 4 cable-laid. The jack takes its slowest gear. The top is bigger, with deeper grooves. The foreman eyes the lay angle, the slant of the twist across the rope's length, and nods when it falls into that comfortable range that makes sailors and cranes trust their day. He keeps a palm open on the side of the rope it comes past, feeling for a high strand or a lazy valley. A high place gets a tap with a wooden fid, a valley gets ignored. It will sort itself 3 yards later, not because neglect is a policy, because wood and fibre both prefer a little time to show they know what to do. Serving now, worming, parceling, and serving for the big cable to face weather and iron. Worming is small cords laid in the valleys along the rope to make the surface fair. Parceling is strips of tarred canvas wrapped with their lay to shed water. Serving is small stuff wound tight over the hole, mallet in hand, cord running through the mallet's groove as the mallet spins around and walks down the rope. The server hums. The man holding the mallet works with his hip, not his arm, letting weight and habit do the job. You can read the tightness by the shine. A dull glow means right, a wet gleam means too much love. Unlikely to crack a mat frown means slack and soon to drink water. They land in the middle every time, because they have learned a lane no book could write fast enough. If you lose your place, looking down the length of the walk, the way a rope runs like a horizon, drawn with a pencil, nothing falls apart. The serving will advance. A boy will dab tar from a brush into a dry place and rub it with the heel of his hand to make it an equal citizen. The top will rest on its hook and feel pleased to be a tool that breeds quiet. The bold rope for the sailmaker asks for different manners. Fine hemp, close lay, no tar where hands must sew without learning to dislike their needles. The spinner pulls smoother twist into the yarn. The top for closing is smaller. The lay a fraction tighter, so the rope will sit obediently on a bolt of canvas and not try to introduce itself in ways that remind a sail of it when wind picks up. A yard measure hangs on a nail. The man on length calls out 30 fathoms, then ties a small weft of red at the 10, white at the 20, so the sailmaker will know where he is without waking anyone. Anchor the splice. On the bench, the foreman opens the rope with a fid wooden spike smooth as a spoon and unlays 3 ends. He tucks strand 1 under strand 1, strand 2 under strand 2, strand 3 under 3, against the lay so nothing sleeps wrong. He heaves each home with a long pull that uses his leg and hip and leaves arms free to show judgment. He halves the ends and tucks again, no lumps, no long stories. He rolls the splice underfoot, rubs a little tallow, and then, because a splice should disappear into work and not wave its flag, he taps lightly with a mallet until the lay forgets there was a moment of doubt. He trims whiskers with a knife that only knows rope. Someone once used it on bread and was forgiven, but never allowed near the tool again without a friend. Proof comes before praise. Out in the yard by the beam post, a dead man in the ground takes a turn. The other end runs to a capstan on rails that a donkey turns, because the donkey does not care for what men think about men. The rope stretches a chalk mark, moves a small and honest amount. The foreman measures the stretch and says good. If it had said too much, the rope would have found a different destiny, made into smaller lengths where its ambition could help instead of hinder. Good rope knows its place. Bad rope finds a better place. No arguments. If you sit on the sill and blink at the tar brush drying in the sun, nothing in the yard will forget itself. The donkey will continue his small circle without complaint. A man will give him a pat where donkey necks prefer, which is not the place outsiders guess. The chalk mark will dry. The capstan pole will show its teeth and then not use them. The walk becomes a coil house. The cable comes off the traveller and onto a turntable wooden disc on a spindle that turns with a bar so coil can form in neat, flat spirals that will pay out without teaching a man to use new language. The coil is bound crosswise at quarters with spun yarn and a few neat turns. A hemp tag with paint on its end finds the center painted words are not needed when a foreman's mark and a length tape live in the same pocket. A tarred canvas outer cover wraps the coil for storage, laced with marlin in the sailor's way, not the warehouseman's, because coils love to go to sea as they never leave the shed. Anchor, the marks for ownership. The dock company asks for a blue whip of thread wound through the serving at every fathom for the first 10. The boy threads a bodkin and passes the blue in. He doesn't thread it tight, he lets it lie so it can be cut out later without hurting the rope's face. The foreman signs a paper and the paper goes on a nail by the office window that opens toward the hedge. The nail holds only papers that mean ship in 2 days or barge by Friday. A separate nail, shorter by a finger, holds papers that mean when it suits us. No one wrote that down. The nails taught it. Midday bread smells, because the baker sent to loaves down the lane and the foreman cut them with a knife whose edge cares nothing for romantic stories. Cheese appears on a clean board, a jug of small beer leans in the shade hands. Do not eat at the serving place. There is a bench. It receives talk about weather that will matter to rope damp, makes tar slow dry, makes hemp want to drink. Someone mentions a new contract for Manila abaca from across the world. The foreman says, we will treat it as we treat hemp and see if it behaves. Everyone nods, because that is how you learn new rope, by putting it to old rules, not by coddling it with speeches. Afternoon. Small lines for the chandlery log line in fathoms with tucks and marks, lead line with the old code of cloth strips and leather. The boy ties a strip of red at 2 fathoms, a white at 3, blue at 5, leather with a hole at 10, leather without at 15. Then repeats the code so a sound in a dark channel can carry exact numbers to a deck that needs not drama but depth. He coils the lead line in the round so it will pay out like a gentleman's sentence and not like a spool that forgot its manners. A sail maker arrives with a bolt of canvas and a pencil behind his ear. He wants bolt rope to one edge. The walk gives him a length that sits on the cloth selvage if it had waited for that day all its life. He runs his hand along it and says nothing that needs writing down. He pays partly in coin and partly in a promise to cut a small bag for the boy's marlin spike, because the boy is going to keep it sharper than his wits if someone doesn't give it a coat. Everyone agrees silently that a marlin spike needs a bag more than the boy needs a new habit, and both will have one by Saturday. Anchor, the book. In the forehouse, a ledger lies flat under a weight. Columns for date, fibre, counts, lay, length, destination. Returned for fault, empty more often than not because faults prefer to happen far away from foreman. A line today, hemp, 3 hawsers laid left 3 to cable laid right 90 fathoms served, wormed, parcel to Linton Key mark, brew whip-proofed good. The handwriting is square and without loops of 4 letters, not for the day's record. A stub of pencil sits in a socket tied by string. The string says stay home to pencils better than any speech. Toward late afternoon, the tar house reaches its sleep, the fire banked, the lid set, the ladle hung by its lip, so it will dry without making a black tear on the bench. The serving mallets go back to their pegs, the tops are wiped with a rag that drops no lint. The fid gets a rub of oil, because wood that lives in tar still likes courtesy. The donkey gets a handful of something sweet, his ears say less gruff things than people guess. If you let your eyes close, the long walk will stay straight in the dark. Ropes will hold their twist. The sand will keep the print of today's boots beside last year's and behave as if such prints were a language that reads and keeps private. Evening comes with short chores. Coils tag small lines reeled, a bundle of tow swept and bagged for the smith's fire, because tow burns in a way that makes small iron happy. The hedge outside takes a shift in the wind and shows a small rag left by a child. The foreman plucks it free and hangs it on a low nail that someone's mother will check in the morning, because mothers read rope walks too. If you give them a clue, the boy washes his hands in warm sand and soap. then in cold water, and watches the tar lines give up their hold without a quarrel. He rubs his fingers with lemon, because lemon wins quiet contests other things lose. The last check is length once more. The fathom board shoulders the rope's mind. Peg to peg, 6 feet. Hand to hand, a small grunt at each pass. 90 fathoms reminded, not discovered. The foreman ties a length mark at 10, with a piece of white at 20, with blue at 30, with red at 40, with white again, because cycles teach the mind better than rows of numbers. He stands back and sees the cable as ships will see it, as weight and trust and the thing that will not betray either. Night leaves the long shed a dark instrument. The roof ticks a bird wakes, and forgets why a cat pads the sand to no purpose and all purpose. The tar pot calls and takes a skin like pudding, the ladle sleeps. The traveller sits at the far end with its brake cord slack. It has walked a great many miles without moving its feet. The hooks at the head arm fall into shadow. They will wake as they always have, not proud, only faithful. The ledger closes with a sound like a truth being folded. Tomorrow, line will learn to be yarn, yarn to strand, strand to hawser, hawser to cable tow, will learn to be small twine fingers, will learn different temperatures and say nothing boastful about it. A sailor will lift a coil in a yard, built by other men, and bless or curse it, without knowing who laid it. The rope will take the blessing and ignore the curse. A knot will cinch and hold, and nobody will remember this long shed when the safe weight settles on a hook at sea. That forgetting is not a loss, it is how tools complete their stories. The 11th part. A narrow stair leads to a room that keeps its own weather. The windows face north, so light arrives without drama, as stove holes are small. Reliable heat that never bullies ink into drying too soon. Along the wall stand type cases in pairs, up or above, lower below, tilted at a friendly angle. The labels read like a map. A-E-I-O-U, B-C-D-F-G. Ligatures here, punctuation there. A composing stone slab of smooth granite on stout legs waits at the center, with a chase lying empty on its face. Coins and key off to one side. On a shelf live leads in lengths thin strips of soft metal that teach type to breathe, beside them brass rules, furniture of wood and iron, and a small tin that keeps a few hair spaces for the moments when only a hair will do. Anchor. We are at the case. The compositor balances a composing stick in his left hand, sets its adjustable fence to 20 ms pica, and begins to lift letters with his right. He reads copy with one eye and the case with the other, never hurrying the second. Letters sit nick up in the stick, his thumb rides their faces to keep them honest. LAMP, tiny bricks laid in reverse, the world mirrored into sense by habit. The stick grows a line, he drops in a 4-2 m space between words, then a thick space where wider kindness is needed. At the line's end he feels the measure land. If the last word sulks, he N and M justifies, trades a thin for a thick, slides a hair until the line stands easy. He sets a lead across and begins again. The case whispers its own order, reach long for the W, short for the E, the Q hides where memory put it years ago and stays put. He transfers full lines to a galley long tray with a lip and builds a paragraph like brickwork that doesn't sag. A blue pencil mark in the copy shows a small correction. Harbour to harbour he smiles, reaches for a U, and remembers to keep regional politeness as carefully as spacing. When the galley holds a column that looks like it could stand a test of reality, he ties the type with page cord, lifts it with both hands, and sets it on the imposing stone where the chase lies waiting, a rectangular iron frame that will one day hold a page's promise. Imposition is a folding trick taught by paper, for a folio, 4 pages on a sheet for quarto, 8 for octavo, 16 the sheet will fold and cut, and leaves will fall in order if the mirror work on the stone is true. He lays furniture in the chase to make wells for each page and drops the pages into their rooms. Page 1 faces page 4 here, because folding will create sense from this temporary nonsense. He trues margins with a composing rule, checks that running heads sit equal, and that folios page numbers know their places. He sets coins wedged devices between furniture and chase, and turns them with a queen key until the form firms. Not tight like pride, tight like responsibility, The stone answers with a small, civilized ring when he raps a corner with the back of the key. That ring says, "Puller-proof." Ink lives in a can, thick and listening. This shop uses composition rollers. Glue and treacle turn to a resilient skin that likes ink and likes to give it back. Once, the pressman would have used two ink balls padded leather stuffed with hair and danced them to lay color. Today the roller takes the work. He pulls a little ink with the ink knife, lays it on the disc, and lets the hand brayer spread it until it turns from black to the grey that says ready. The tympana frame with taut paper packing lies on the bed. The frisket another frame carries cutouts that match the page so margins stay clean. Packing under the tympan paper and a sheet of soft sets firmness. He lays the form on the bed and draws the frame over it. The frisket shuts with a dry little kiss. Anchor, the press itself. Albion in this room cast iron. Straight-sided. A toggle that multiplies human insistence into even pressure. A hand lays a sheet on the point-stiny pins that fix register, then brings the frisket down tympan. Closes the carriage rolls into the platen. He takes the bar and pulls once. Feeling the toggle come home. Is a lift at the shoulder more than a shove at the hand. He lets the bar return and runs the carriage back, lifts frisket, and tympan takes the sheet by its corners and lifts a proof that smells of linseed and this morning's judgment. He pins it to a board and reads. The F leaned one hair, the S in glass doubled a kern into nicks a neighbour in a way that will cost a swear if not cured. He slips a small tissue under the tympan macaridi, where the ink printed shy scrapes a shaving under, where it printed bold. He lifts the F with tweezers, files a whisper off its foot, sets it back. He swaps the offending S, checks its nick for the right font, drops it, taps the surrounding type with a planer and a mallet to settle the town again. Another pull. Better. One more. Right. He draws a light chalk across the tympan to find the points again. Removes the points so finished sheets won't carry holes and marks register on the frisket. He calls to the layman at the heap. The layman jogs a sheaf of paper, sets it square on the board, and finds a grip that a day can live with. Feed begins. If you leave your attention on the window, where grey turns to serviceable daylight, the press will keep its manners. Sheet lifts, lays, frisket down, pull, frisket up, sheet hung on cords across the ceiling to dry. Next sheet ready. The bar breathes once per page, then once again. The heat melts with the slow honesty of a snowdrift sliding into spring. Ink grows less, a hand touches the disc and knows to add not a dollop, a kiss. The press speaks in one sentence repeated. Roll, lay, pull, lift, hang. By mid-morning the form for the back of the sheet stands ready. The first side, work, hangs on a line. The second side, turn, waits for the lay. The point holes are gone, now register will live on marks and the pressman's polite memory. He adjusts the frisket windows so no printing will be shaved away. The layman offers the first turned sheet. The bar comes down, a sound from the platen says even. He holds the second pull against the first to see that heads meet heads and margins play their quiet arithmetic. They do. The room nods without moving. Anchor. The stone again for a title page. Ornaments live in their own small case. Flowers, borders, long and short rules. A brass rule will make a thin line that holds a page together like a shoelace. He takes a two-line letter for the first capital, a small space to let it breathe. Then the patient probate of smaller sorts. The title does not shout, it stands level. The imprint at the foot takes the date and street, printed on Fish Lane, next to the bellfounder's yard, because directions often do the work of pride more cleanly than adjectives. At noon, a proofsman with red pencil sits by the window and marks a slant here, a letter there. He's calm, rarely uses the little curly mark printers invented when devils danced in a form. And when he does, he writes words next to it that a grown person can understand. Transpose, he writes, but he also writes the words to transpose. The compositor removes his hat because a page illuminated with care asks for manners. He corrects cleanly lifted types, go into a hellbox when they are damaged. Back to the case when sound hellbox sorts later into pigs for the founder to melt and return as tomorrow's patients. If you drift a moment toward the window and watch a cart roll past with rag bales for the paper mill, Nothing will go to waste. The layman's hand will keep feeding. The press will keep its breath in measure. The air will carry a narrower stripe of linseed and a wider stripe of tea as someone lifts a lid without heat. The day wears toward binding its sheets, leave the lines crisp and dry. In the bindery, a bone folder waits on green baize. A plough and press stand like a patient instrument. By the window, sewing frames and a stack of tapes sit near a chair that knows how to keep a spine straight and a person comfortable in the same hour. Collating comes first. The folded sheet signatures carry tiny marks at the foot. A hand runs them into order. A, B, C. The small mark rises step by step like stairs to make the catcher smile. A slip of paper on the pile says collated twice, which is as close to boasting as anyone will try today. Folding. Each sheet finds its crease under a bone that warms as it works, finding the grain, never fighting it. The folder checks the head and tail, nudges corners until the stack breathes evenly, knocks the back on the board. Rest. Sewing. Cords or tape stretched on the sewing frame. Kettle stitch beginning at the tail. Signatures take 4 or 5 stations. The needles curve learned by fingers that do not use the eye more than they must. The thread is linen, waxed under a cake that sits in a little dish like a moon. It slides through paper in a hiss that anyone who grew up near books mistakes for quiet rain. Anchor. The rounding and backing. A hammer with a broad face and quiet ambition persuades the sewn pole to arch into a backbone. The backing boards clamp the text block, and a steel folder runs to fold the swell over the cords, so boards will hinge without remembering their work too loudly. Glue comes warm from a part of simple animal glue that smells like truth, and a cupboard. The spine takes a coat and a strip of mallopan weave cloth and a paper lining. Headbands at head and tail coloured silk wound over a core can be sewn or set on here. The binder sews them because yesterday's board edge has to be well met today. Boards cut to size millboard or pasteboard, not thick, not thin, laced on if cords, pasted on if tapes, pressed for a spell while a kettle thinks about singing. Edges get their moment. Plough in the lane press trims them true. A sprinkling brush shakes colour along the foredge with a shield to keep the boards clean. A gleam appears less like vanity and more like weather. The covering waits, calf for a better book, cloth for a sound one. The binder pastes out the cloth on a board, lifts the text block in and down, rubs the spine, turns in the head and tail, works the corners into sentences that end neatly, nips in the press. Cases stand upright for a breath, then casing in, paste to end papers. Text block finds the case, boards close. The book rests under light weight, so paste can learn to be friendship, not a trap. If you close your eyes while the book sits in the standing press, nothing will get ahead of itself. Paste will move where it belongs and get no ideas. The press screws will hold their word. The kettle will not boil hard enough to scald. Finishing. For those books that ask, a pallet heats on a small stove. Brass letters stand in a frame. Leaf gold waits on a cushion. Thin as pride and twice as fragile. The finisher sets a line on the spine title. Maybe a little line at head and tail breathes, wants to fog the gold enough for the heat to find it. Then lays the tool. The gold that does not find heat brushes away into a drift on the cushion, to be gathered and made into size or story later by someone who saves more than money. The letters read quiet and correct. The book looks like a person going out in a coat that fits. Anchor. The bookseller's counter. A stack of new work sits where eyes can fall on it without being told to. The binder brings into on trial. The bookseller taps the spine and nods. He presses a thumb inside the joint. It opens without complaints and lies not flat, not that kind of book, just willing. A small pencil mark on the flyleaf sets the price in a code that thieves cannot use and friends do not need. He lays one in the window next to an almanac and a pamphlet about canals, whose fold will know a pocket's curve by late afternoon. Back in the printing room, the form that did good service has its day's ending. He loosens the coins, lifts out pages into galleys, ties them, distributes letters back to their cases. Mind wandering would introduce wrong sorts into wrong boxes and teach grief to the next day. The last few sorts rest in the stick. He empties them into the case and smooths them with a palm as if to say, "Thank you." The hell box gets its small tribute and will go to the founder at week's end. A rag with a little eye wipes ink from the roller. The roller gets a dust of French chalk to sleep. The press bed is brushed, the tympan gets its packing checked, the frisket lies open. Windows set to dry. If sleep edges closer, the last minutes will not wake it. A clock in the hall speaks the hour in a wood voice. The stone calls a degree. The composing stick, empty now, sits on the case lip like a tool that knows tomorrow weather better than any almanac, because work itself is a calendar, and this room keeps it. Outside, the lane smells of bread and the hint of iron where the bell founder stirred his pit at noon. Inside, a single page lies under a weight, so a curl will unlearn itself overnight. The ledger receives one neat line, ream one, work and turn, forms corrected, first and second pulled 12s to binder 8 south to bookseller type distributed. The pencil goes in the groove. The lamp by the stair wears a glass that forgot soot years ago. Someone remembers to trim it right. Tomorrow, a new copy will arrive. Perhaps a sermon meant to walk calmly on Sundays. Perhaps a broadsheet listing ships and tide hours. Perhaps a small book of measurements that will live in a coat pocket and save a man from guessing bridges by eye. The stick will take its measure, the case will lend its letters coins, will persuade the press will breathe, once paper will remember. The 12th part. Morning holds the ridge in a cool hand. Grass beads the ankles, a kite writes a narrow line above and forgets to finish it. On the cart, canvas comes back from brass, a tall theodolite in a fitted case, tripod legs bound with a leather strap, a plain table folded like a book, chain in a basket with its brass tallies, and a bundle of staffs banded with paint for measure. A wooden flagstaff leans on a turf cut yesterday to make the station clean. 3 stones sit where boots will want them, so the station stays square all day. A book with oilskin covers lies on the seat, its pencil rides in a loop, its pages smell faintly of wax and rain. Anchor. We stand by the chain and the tally pins. The chain is 100 links of steel, each link united by a loop riveted snug at every 10 links. A brass tag shaped like a small swallow declares 10, 20, 30 to fingers that prefer touch to guessing. 10 arrows, slender steel pins sit in a leather quiver. They count the chainings the way a quiet mind counts breaths. The head chainman takes the first arrow, sets the 0 on the baseline stake, and walks until the 100 touches the foot chainman's hand. Chain. The call is plain. The arrow goes in the ground, the chain gathers, they walk again. When the land bends, the head chainman breaks chain, laying the last links along a slope and reading the rise from the staff, so later a right triangle will put the distance on level paper. It is patient work and exact without pretension. They began this sheet with a baseline straight, as a torch string laid across a meadow where moles mine their own books. Over to days, the baseline took its length under a sky that did not argue today, becomes a side in the first triangle. High points that can see each other take flags, a whiteboard on a pole here on the next hill, a ladder of laths painted white, sitting like a sketch of a doorway farther still, a church tower with a square of canvas bound to its lead by a sexton whose fees counted in tea, and a piece of small beer. For long reach, the helograph will do sun caught in a mirror and sent down a line when the light comes steady. An angle can be born. Anchor. The theodolite. The box opens on brass that has been kept away from bad air. The tripod feet bite the turf, the head settles, the circular bubble teaches level. The plate level makes it finer screws, take up slack without winning arguments. The instruments circle the limwares, divisions cut to minutes, a vernier reads the extra truth half minutes, and a whisper beyond. The alidade swings, the telescope lifts the crosshairs, find the flag a small screw, teaches perfect. The book opens, the observer calls red, and the bookman writes, face left, angle from the previous line, face right. The checker mean for the day. Angles close a triangle, triangles, knit to triangles by noon. The hill owns a net you could fold and carry if it were not attached to the country itself. The plane table comes up for the close work. It is a board on a tripod, a sight alidade on its face, and a sheet pinned tight with drawing pins. The surveyor places the table at a plotted point, orients it by sighting a known station, and begins to draw lines from the point toward new detail. Hedge lines, a ditch, the angle of a lane, it comes over a brow and drops its stones into quiet shade. The pencil is hard, it leaves a line that prints well and resists smudge. A light touch means truth without noise. Each line will own a length found by chaining, each length will own a rise or fall found by level and staff. Anchor, the level and the staff. A dumpier level fixed to be steady sits on its 3 screws, the bubble is centered, the staff painted in feet and tenths, or in S, that the lens reads at a distance goes to a turning point. A stone or a spike set where boots will not shift it. Backside from benchmark to staff, foresight onward a rise. A full the page shows a column of digits that never needed to be loud to be sure. A benchmark, a broad arrow cut in stone with a horizontal nick above lives on a bridge abutment. A church step, a gate pier. The cut will be there when the men are not, it will hold its 0 against which every other number on this day will confess or keep quiet. When the sun leans, the big instrument returns to the box. In its place, a small clinometer reads the lean of a slope for assures later short strokes that show which way a hill falls and how quickly. Contours, too, where the sheet asks a line each 10 feet or 20. Equal cousins that trace an invisible shelf on the ground. The chainman walk a contour round a hill. Counting steps, setting pegs where the ground agrees to be that height. A sheep looks up, then remembers grass. A lark throws a thought up and fetches it back. The page fills with lines that will be married in the drawing office to make a hill that looks as if you could walk it with a fingertip. If your focus rests, the instruments will not misbehave. The bubble will hold true, the chain will bite the grass, and not the book. The pencil will lie where it was set. The flag will wait, square against the breeze, and the church's vane will mind the weather without speaking to us about it. The triangulation reaches farther than a day. Signals stand on towers, on hilltop frames of timber, sometimes on barrels stacked and lashed at night. Lamps behind honeyed glass red as steady stars that can be measured when the air lies still and no heat dances between. Men carry ladders to belfries, and the verger is patient or not, but always paid. On a long flight, a heliostat catches sun with a small mirror that turns because a clockwork asks it to. The flash stutters, then steadies on the crosshair. Angle read, angle checked, bookmarked, somewhere in another country's cool office. A net like this one meets ours edge to edge, and the seam is quieter than most seams people make. Anchor, the field book. Each page is a day, folded into columns. Station names on the left, angles across, remarks in a hand that doesn't boast and never wanders. Where a footpath crosses a hedge, a note, style, 3 steps, oak post north side. Where a spring begins in a damp place, wet rushes, pipe head under slab. At the end of the page, a sum, triangle closure errors. A second written in red to say this was noticed and cured. The pencil shrinks, the pen holds its nib. The man who writes licks the tip of his finger before he turns the page, not because ink asks it, because habit. Down below, in a barn, the parish rents 4 sixpence when wheat is out and maps are in. The drawing office begins. A big table in the best light slates 4 rough, a sheet of wove paper sized with gelatine that will hold ink without revenge. The surveyor lays his field sheet dull, quick, crisscrossed with lines and numbers beside a clean sheet and transfers with pricker and scale. Pricks through on main points, light pencil joins, ink follows with a steel pen adjusted to behave. Bridges where a neat symbol, churches across with a tower where towers exist, hedges are short lines, orchards are tiny dots with a circle, quarries hatch a pit, a milestone gets a dot and miss. Roads, thick lanes, thin footpaths, a hare, he names. Names choose their size from their thing. River large across the water pond, small beach cops curled along the trees, fish lane tucked where a tart of ink will not smear it later, all lettered by hand in a style that does not borrow too much flourish from a writing master. Hills gain her shores, light at the crown, darker where slope draws down the hand, follows rules learned by eye and corrected by geography instead of vanity. A spare pallet waits if wash is asked, a faint hint for water that does not wake anyone, a shadow under a bridge, honest and short. Anchor, the engraving room, Copper plates, one for each quadrant of a sheet, sit on sandbags that hold them still without scalding the wrists that work them. The engraver reverses the map in his hand, and tool remind copper what the field remembered first. A burin cuts a line acid, can bite in where varnish was lifted with the point names are punched by hand from small steel letters and then dressed with the graver until they look like they were always meant to be there. A little calendared paper sits under his hand to keep flesh from polishing the plate where shine would later lie like an uninvited guest on someone's table. He wipes the plate with white ink, he checks it against a proof. He shaves the tiniest ridge from a river's bend so the press won't thicken the line where it bends. Printing intaglio asks for ink like rich pudding. The plate warms on a hot table. Ink is worked into every line with a dabber and muslin, then the surface is wiped with tarlatan. Then with the palm, a slow, patient polish that leaves ink only in the cuts. Damp paper laid, not wove. When the plate likes the grain rests in a stack under boards, one sheet comes. Laid on the plates, woolen blankets fold over the bed of the rolling press, travels under the cylinder with a force that persuades paper into cuts and lifts ink out. The sheet peels with a sound that binds taste to memory, lies on white boards to dry, and then on a line to think. A man with a clean apron and clean hands who keeps them clean by thinking ahead carries it to a rack. The next sheet waits. If you drift here, nothing sharp intrudes. The press sighs, the ink breathes, the blankets keep their sleep. A woman sits at a table and colors water lightly with a brush that has one hair longer than its fellows. She lays a faint blue into a river that does not want to be a ribbon, only to be itself. Her hand stops short of sea, another wash will meet it there tomorrow. Anchor, the letter room for titles and borders, wood letters for big words, brass rules for boxes, an ornament here and there that does nothing foolish. The printer in the next building pulls a title on a separate press and pastes it in register with the copper impressions so border and plan marry without quarrel. The paste is thin, the roller finds the edge and no more. A bone folder teaches the union to behave. A man in a coat with elbows that tell you about last year carries finished sheets to the bindery where covers wait linen stretched over pasteboard. A pocket for a small card that will someday bear a pencil circle around a parish someone loves or hates. Out back, the case maker folds covers, pastes a label, fits a linen guard to the spine. Inside, a man on a bench folds sheets into sections to make a book map. Another folds once and once again, so a pocket map learns to be a concertina that will close for a coat and open for a field. He tucks the bottom edge into a cloth strip so repeated opening will like him. A brass stamp marks the cover with a crown and a scale, 1 inch to a mile. Not because the map brags, because a walker and the farmer both like to agree on how long a mile is before boots learn to scold. If drowsiness settles a little, the measurements will not drift. Benchmarks will keep their arrows, the triangulation will still stand on its hills. Whether eyes are on them or not, copper will keep its lines and forget your absence immediately, which is a kindness. The surveyor's pack to move a mile. The theodolite goes back into its fitted case. The chain is wiped with a rag that leaves it quiet. The arrows count 10 again, so the next field doesn't begin in a sulk. A note goes to the parish. Ladder needed for tower next week, weather fair permitting. A second note, shorter, thanks for the key. The church warden reads it and nods to a box where keys live and quarrel about nothing. The cart's wheel finds a rut and a man sets a flattener from just a plank so the wheel remembers to behave there next time. Quiet tools for quiet corrections. Anchor, the trig point, before such points became concrete pillars. Today it is a cairn of stones trimmed to a flat top and a stout timber set with an iron shoe that takes the tripod foot the same place each time. The shoe makes a round mark. Men will come decades later and see that round and think, someone knew where to stand. They will pour concrete, set a brass plate with a cross. They will cite to new stations, and older net will be retriangulated, and the errors that lived like a breath in earlier work will be swept into corners and forgiven, not scolded. It is a long, generational courtesy between hands that never shook. By late afternoon, the lane below reads like the map above. Hedge, Style, ditch, a dog that thinks the style is a question and learns that it is in fact an answer. The field party notes a track not on the last edition and a footbridge missing a plank and draws them truthfully without remarks that the book cannot carry. The book does not carry weather or the taste of tea on a windy stile. It carries lines that let you find your way in boots and in the head you carry. The day closes on a bench. The field book gets a line that says where they left off the pencils are sharpened with a small knife that loses no temper. The chain is rolled and tied. The theodolite case buckles shut with a sound that could also mean see you tomorrow. The ridge remembers footprints for an hour and then eats them with dew. A barn owl sets itself on the post where the signal sat and reads its own map by sound. The map that will come out of this day does not plan to impress a mantle. It plans to keep the promise between a milepost and a stream crossing after rain. It plans to show a church by its ground, not by its sermons. It plans to know the width of a bridge and the curve of a lane and the way a house leans when a wind from the west tries to talk it into turning. It will fold. It will be put in a pocket. It will be looked at under a hedge with a finger because the person holding it has only one hand free. It will travel and come home. If it tears, a bit of linen and paste will mend it, and the mend will be better than forgetfulness. Tomorrow, flags at new corners, angles to take, a bubble to center, a chain to lay, a benchmark to cut if no one is stone offers one. The pencil will begin short and end shorter. The book will have to more pages filled. The land will not notice. The sea will keep its distance from the bar. The hills will give back exactly what the instrument asked of them, and somewhere in a drawer, a copper plate will wait with its lines bright where a hand kept them from tarnish, ready to be inked again for the walker who has not yet been born. The 13th part. Before the village has chosen a colour, a wind comes across the hedges and finds the mill first. The tower stands on its knoll, brick round as a good loaf, cap shingled and shouldered to the sky. Overnight the fantail faced it. The little vanes at the tail of the cap read the wind, while people slept and turned the whole roof until the 4 great sails point their edges to morning. At the yard fence the miller slips the latch and walks in with a key on a ring that knows the door's weight. His lamp isn't needed. Long eastern light works through the shuttering, turns the dust to mild weather, and shows the ladder that climbs floor by floor like an argument that never raised its voice. Outside, the cloth waits folded in the sailcloth chest. Today's wind is a working one honest paces, no temper, so the miller will spread 2 cloths on each sail and keep the 3rd reefed. Common sails here, canvas laced to sail bars. The newer patent shutter sails live at larger mills on the plain where men like iron to make the small judgments. He climbs the sail stage with a bundle under his arm, a reefing line coiled at his waist. One sail sits vertical. He walks out on the whip, toes shore, and unrolls canvas boltropes, fall into their grooves. Grommets marry the irons reef bands tie with shorts, clever knots that undo without deciding to stay. He leaves the outermost cloth furled to keep pride out of the morning. The cap creaks a polite answer as the fantail noses another degree into line. Anchor. We stand at the curb and gallery where cap meets tower. Underfoot a great iron track runs the circle under the cap. A ring of casters rides it. The curb wears a smear of tallow from last week's habit. The pinion from the fantail turns a set of gears that turn a rack around the curb. No hurrying roofs are heavy, even when they've learned to float. He listens, because iron tells truth if asked gently. No click out of place, no tooth that wants sympathy. Below, the brake wheel on the windshaft waits so calms. Iron teeth, a rim shod with leather that loves and hates the brake. The wind will lift the sails if given its head. The brake rope, wound on a drum, gives or takes at head. He eases the rope from the bollard, gives a little, feels the rub. Hears the first breath in the sails as canvas remembers why it is canvas. The arms start slow. 1. To the mill speaks its low beginning. Winding cloth, shaft through bearings. Brake wheel kissing the wallower at the top of the upright shaft. Down in the mill, gears begin to say their day. The grain arrives on backs and carts, and in sacks with marks chalked in quick hands farm names that know themselves without spelling. The sack hoist rope hangs from its drum under the cap, a wooden barrel driven by a belt taken from the great spur wheel when a lever says now. He hooks a sack by its lift tie, tugs the telltale bell, pulls the lever drum bites, rope climbs. The sack rises through trapdoors that open one at a time and close of their own weight, so luck doesn't get ideas. At the beam floor he swings the sack in, unhooks, and lets the hoist size still. No speeches, the rope looks pleased anyway. Anchor the stones. On the stone floor, 2 pairs stand in their tons timber casings that keep flowers where it belongs. 1 pair is French burr, pieced from small blocks that travelled wrapped against argument and were bound into a circle with plaster and iron hard, keen, fond of white flour. The other is Peak, Derbyshire stone, tougher than sharp, good for meal that wants body. Each runner stone sits over its bed, lifted by a crane with a crook, the millstone crane with a worm and wheel and an iron hook called a Spanish windlass in someone's grandfather's mouth. Today they'll open the burrs for dressing before noon wind grows mischievous. He lets the brake take hold, the sails turn twice more, then fold into stillness with a small shiver as canvas forgets a little. The brake wheel's leather smells warm. He leads the rope to its pin and sets the weight. The wind complains under its breath and then gets over it. He pulls the tun lids, dust lifts and settles again with the older dust-like cousins. The runner stone shows its face, furrows radial and true, lands flat between. He blackens the face with a dab of lampblack and turns the runner a hands with raised places wipe clean. Low places keep a grey. This is the bill's to-do list. The stone dresser's tools live in a neat roll, a mill bill and thrift, steel tooth held in a stock, a smaller pick for throat work, a straight edge with a lifetime's scratches, a wooden mallet that strikes metronome. He sits on the stall, leans and picks. The blows are not savage, they are exact. Furrows deep in a breath, lands take a fine, even land that will shear grain without teaching it to burn. He checks with the straight edge and a shard of light. He prints with lampblack again and hums a tune with no words that belongs to this room. The runner's eye around at the centre shows the rind, an iron cross that takes the drive from the quant, the upright spindle. He oils the rind slot with a cloth that enjoys the attention and sets a thought aside. Later, the tentering screw will want a touch, so the stones run as near as Flower asks. If your attention wanders to the ladder, where sunlight cuts through the trapdoor edges and turns flower motes into small planets, no line will be lost. The pick will keep its patience, the straight edge its rule. The mill has all day to remember what a sharp face means. Back to wind and grain. He pulls the brake off. 1 hand on the spoke, the sails lean into it again. Today's temper still friendly. Upstairs the hopper feeds the shoe, a small tilted trough, and the damsela, little iron with lobes on the taps the shoe just enough to keep grain walking, not running. The tapping is the mill's old chatter. In a room like this, the damsel has the right to speak. Grain slides between stones, the hollow at the eye takes it. The furrows throw it out. The lands shear it fine. Warm breath rises when it is right, hot breath scalds when stones are too close. He feels the spout, not because he likes to, because a hand knows temperature better than any sermon. He toes the tentering lever, the gap changes the thickness of a hair, the sound sweetens. He smiles without making an announcement to the empty room. Anchor, the great spur wheel and the stone nuts. The upright shaft brings the wallowers turned down from the cap. On this floor, the great spur wheel wooden rim, and iron cogs turn slow and sure. Little gears called stone nuts slide in on their spindles to take that turn to each pair of stones. He irons one out, draws it back, so only the burrs run. The peak stones will wait 4 oats later. A belt runs off the spur wheel to the sack hoist again. Another belt sleeps until the bolter wants to work. Power in a mill is not proud, it is portioned. The bolter lives 1 floor below, a long reel clothed in silk, turning inside a box. Flour falls from the stones into the hopper above, enters the reel, and scrolls along as the reel turns. Fine flour sifts through silk to a spout. Middlings find their own mesh bran exits at the far end, honest and large. He laces a rent in the silk with wax thread and ties off with a square knot that will not surprise anyone next week. The bolter's sound is a soft, polite rain in a dry room. Mid-morning a farmer brings 2 more sacks up the yard. He and the miller weigh together on the beam scale by the door. The scale's pans carry old marks from flour that left its fingerprints years ago. The iron weights carry the crown stamp from the sealer, who visits once a season and files a whisper where a metal nose lied, if it dared. Toll is taken in the old way. A pecking 24 the mill here, the farmer pays in coin and gets a tallied slate mark. The miller chalks onto the sack wheat fine adds a small sign that only the 2 of them use, a habit as good as an oath. The wind breathes harder now. On the cap, a governor works to iron balls on arms spinning from a small belt off the windshaft. As speed rises, the balls climb, the arms open, a linkage pinches the sluice to the stones, the feed slackens. People call it a what governor at the steam mill here. A millwright gave wind a cousin to that wisdom. The miller watches the sails and the hedges beyond. No squall line, only a gust that earned its name. He shortens cloth on the next lull, walks out and ties the outer band in, takes a long look to the west, and nods at the fantail that keeps its job without boasting. Anchor, the grease boxes and bearings. At each floor, the upright shaft runs in a bearing box with felt soaked in tallow and oil. He lifts the lids, wipes a trace of dust with a clean finger, feeds a smear where shine says, "I have been wearing the coat you gave me." At the brake wheel a brass step takes the windshaft's thrust it would warm. If neglected it does not, a rag meets it anyway. Habit teaching metal not to toy with its friends. The great spur wheel's cogs are applewood, mortised into the rim and pegged. When one grows tired, it is easy to forgive and replace today. None ask. He opens the peak stones for oats and sets a course address with the tentering screw. Oats carry hull and humour, the stones should learn patience. He turns the shoe strap to give a slow feed. The damsel taps a different speech meal, comes thick and warm, not dusty. In the meal spout a touch of chaff makes a weather that mice like. He clears it with a stick and lays a cat's thought across the floor in places where mice prefer not to find it. The cat reads at the door, blinks, and chooses weather instead of work. If drowsiness walks onto the stair with you, the mill will keep its minute. The governor will lean in the brake, will mind the sails, will show you their orderly quarters when your eyes open again. The miller's daughter comes with a basket and a ledger. She writes names in a hand that does not court attention, ticks a mark for taken. When flour leaves adds a short line. Bran to brown on Friday hens. She sets tea on the bin floor and dusts a place on the rail with the edge of her apron. They do not drink at the stone floor, they drink by the window, where the yard looks like a drawing the surveyor might approve. The wind answers its own question. Against the cap the fantail adjusts a breath. The sails readjust in a line polite as a bow. At noon, dressing done and burrs closed again, he prints once more with lampblack, draws the straight edge across a land and smiles without grinning. He lowers the runner stone with the crane's screw, settles the rind into its bed, checks balance by turning a span and seeing if the stone stops with humility anywhere, not with conceit at the low place. A chip of lead here, a whisper taken off there, and the runner forgets gravity's jokes. The damsel will not rattle for spite later, it will chatter for company only. Anchor, the weather door. On the lee side of the tower, a plank door opens onto the gallery and the smell beyond. He checks the brake ropes, lay around the drum, checks the tie to the pinter turns and a tuck and thinks of a storm 20 years ago when ropes and men had to learn a different speed. He runs his palm along the rail, smooth with seasons of hands. He unties the tail cane that can hold the cap when the fantail sleeps. He doesn't need it today. He ties it anyway and unties it, so the chain remembers its job on days when memory might lag. Afternoon takes the flour to the bolter in a quiet stream. Fine flour rides the first silk, a second grade takes a second bran, a third. He weighs, notes, ties sack mouths with a stick twist that opens easy with one honest turn later. On the scale, a pound might disagree, and then agree. When he shifts the weight a hole, the mill agrees, not with him, with itself. He stamps a small bag with a wood block, the mill's name, nothing fancy. The ink sits where it's told, because today the air respects oil. To boys bring barley. He sets the peak stones wider, turns gently, and watches grits fall like small, golden vowels. The boys are given a handful to taste grits, puts good manners in milk and water. They nod as if they invented this, then carry sacks with arms that will remember the day when winter asks what summer did for them. A shower comes far across the fields and comes here late. He strikes some cloth from the sails, the reef knots open quick. The bowl trope lies down obedient and ties bands secure. The sails run on wet if asked to, but wet cloth ages unevenly, and uneven things in mills become stories people tell with sighs. He takes the moment to oil the wallower's teeth with a pad on a stick, just a breath across faces, no flinging, no dripping. The shower taps the cap, the fantail keeps the line drops race down a shingled roof like topographers' hairlines, thin and correct. Anchor, the tally in chalk, on the brick near the door, above reach for children and below reach for pride. A set of small chalk lines tell a quick truth: sacks in, sacks out, toll taken, gear oiled, stone dressed, bolt silk patched. Tomorrow rain will smear the marks. They will be written again. The king is not a monument here, it is a rhythm. Evening softens. He lets the brake tighten the shade, and the sails slow to a Sunday pace in a weekday coat. Grain left in the hopper will finish its thought. No stone runs empty here, for hand can prevent it. Empty stones kiss, and quarrel stones with work to do keep a civil tone. The damsel's tapping fades, the last flower sifts, the bolter runs 2 breaths longer to clear itself, and then sleeps, drum turning one slow sigh and stopping at its habit. He sweeps flour from a stair where boots don't like to learn to slip. He brushes bearings' faces with a cloth that will be washed tomorrow in water that turns milk-coloured and runs down a yard to a puddle where birds approve. He sets a leather cover over the quant where it meets the floor so drafts won't turn dust into remarks. He checks the trap doors and latches them. The sack hoist rope gets its coil. The hoist lever gets set to off in letters nobody needs to read. If your eyes choose to close while he fixes the last knot on a sack mouth and turns the ticket to face outward, nothing will hurry. The wind will lessen its opinion. The fantail will keep the cap where morning can find it. The stones will cool a finger's breadth at a time, not sulk, not complain. At the very end, he sets the brake full, not abrupt one, to settle. The sails march to a halt with a pasture that would make a sergeant nod and not speak. He ties the brake rope, checks the pin, and pulls the tail cane home. The cap's shingled shoulders lift to the wind once and then rest. On the stone floor, he lowers the ton lid's flour dust size and falls. On the bean floor, he slides the empty sacks into a neat stack and chalks one more short line with the date. A lantern by the door gives a single glow so he can count fingers after counting coins. He writes 3 short bills with a stump of pencil thick from honest use. He shuts the ledger, fits the key to the door, and pulls it closed. The yard holds the smell of flour, damp canvas, and a hint of tallow. Down the slope the lane shows to cart ruts, and a stream of light from a cottage that depends on bread tomorrow, as if bread were a dependable cousin. It is. The mill stands with its sails at spread, because the miller likes a picture that tells wind which way to find them in the morning. The fantail keeps watch without pretending to be a hero. Owls think about business. The brick of the tower holds the day's warmth a minute longer and lets it go politely. Nothing here needs applause. A turning stone, honest cloth, a governor that minds itself, a rope that has learned what a drum prefers. Leave it here for a while, the mill will keep your place and its own. The 14th part. The street outside is still rubbing sleep from its bricks when a small bell over a narrow door gives one discreet note. Inside, the air holds brass and wood shavings and a clean thread of oil that knows how to mind itself. A window looks north, so light arrives honest and untroubled. Beneath it, a bench spreads tools like a quiet alphabet, files with smooth and safe edges, gravers with handles worn oval by one set of fingers, brooches in a fan, a bow 4 turns, tweezers that close without sulks, and a tray where screws sit in tiny numbered rooms. A glass dome keeps a finished watch from dust. Its breath on the inside remembers yesterday's hand. Anchor. We are at the bench mat of green baize. The watchmaker lays a pocket watch before him, a silver pear case, the hinge polite, the bow tight. He opens the outer back with a thumbnail that already knows the notch. The dust cover lifts, the movement looks back with gilt plates that have learned to glow only enough. A key lives on a ribbon, there is no crown here, winding belongs to a key, and an opinion of noon. He breathes once, not for drama, for steadiness, and sets a loop into the corner of his eye. The loop's rim is cork, it does not bruise the lens, shows the world as a place where half a hair is a lane. He lets the mainspring down first. No watch is taught by a fool today. He fits the key to the square, finds the click spring with a finger, lifts gently, feels the tooth by tooth surrender until the spring rests. Only then does the hand reach for screws near the balance cock. The cock comes up, short pivot rising like a whisper. The blue of a balance spring under it holding its circle. The staff ends show polished pivots that hold light without boasting. He unhooks the spring stud, lifts the whole balance, and sets it in a dish that never meets grit. A bridge for the third and fourth wheels follows screws in a line, each return to the place it came from, because brass and steel remember their homes and misbehave when moved without notice. Anchor, the fusee and its chain. On this English table, power does not go straight from a barrel to the train. It takes advice from a comb wide at the bottom, narrow at the top, wrapped in a chain, fine as a cat's whisker, but stronger than its shyness admits. As the spring weakens, the chain climbs from narrow to wide. Leverage forgives the spring's habit and keeps the day even. He loosens the great wheel and lifts the fusee from its pivot with a hand that knows a chain is both friend and saboteur. If you let it leap, it does not leap. He lays the comb down on silk, the chain lies with it. Turns in a small obedient heap, he will not disturb more than necessary. Plates separate, the train lies open. Great wheel, center, third, fourth. An escape, they sit in a row on a shallow tray and do not argue. He turns each pivot with a pin of boxwood to feel for roughness. Boxwood tells truth to brass better than fingernails ever will. One arbor murmurs a pivot accepted too much pride during a fast summer. It will want a stone to kiss it smoother. He notes it in his head, the paper ledger will get words later. The palette fork steel, with faces burnished to a mirror, comes free after its bridge. The fork's jewel tips carry a life in a flash of red that used to be stone in foreground and now guides teeth without insisting on thanks. Anchor, the turns are small, neat lathe held in the hand and turned with a bow. He sets the rough pivot between runners, takes a dog to drive the arbor, and sets the bowstring. The graver's point finds steel, without pushing it rests and persuades. A fingertip of oil helps where help is welcome. He takes the pivot down a hair, burnishes with a polished steel burnisher, and watches the surface begin to read like still water. No step, no ring, no vanity. He checks with a pivot gauge. It falls to the right leaf and no farther. He smiles to no one on purpose. Cleaning is not dramatic, it is important. In a heated dish sits benzene or spirits of wine, depending on the day, and small baskets that receive bridges, screws and wheels. He pegs jewel holes with sharpened pearwood until the peg shows pale, not grey. He wipes the plate faces with a breath and a rag that never lies about lint. The fusee chain does not go in solvent, it sits in a saucer and gets a stroke of a brush with a trace of oil, then a wipe, link by link, because chains are like gossip. Left unexamined, they make trouble. The mainspring slides from its barrel with watch spring pliers. He reads it in his hands, no cracks, no set, that means tiredness. He rubs a smear of thin grease between thumb and forefinger and gives the spring just enough to remember slipperiness. Back into the barrel, it coils without learning to resent it. If your attention drifts to the window, where the jeweler's sign across the lane makes a quiet oval of shadow, nothing on the bench will miss you. Solvent will evaporate, pegs will come clean, the chain will lie without tangles, because hands that have done this 4 years have taught chain to be well brought up. Anchor, reassembly. Plates meet again with a sigh. He sets the train, center first, then third, then fourth, then escape. He lays the top plate and finds each pivot with the tip of a tweezers and the prayerless patience of a person who prefers method to miracles. The last pivot slips with a small click, and the train stands where it should. He tightens screws, by feel never to the last thread, then spins the center wheel with a breath from Bellow's lips. The train runs down in a bright, even whir. He oils, not everything, only where oil teaches, rather than bestows bad habits. The faces of pallet stones very sparingly, the escape wheel teeth with a breath, the pallet bearings capsules, 1 dot each, the third and fourth wheel jewels. A dot with a wire oiler, so small it scolds show-offs. No oil on the fusee arbor, it makes paste there. A dot of heavier oil in the barrel arbor, makes sense, he does it and moves on. The balance returns to its cock, the blue spring glints under the loop. This spring breathes the watch's minutes, its inner end lives on the collet, its outer end sits under the stud at the cock's throat. Over coil. Not today, this spring lies flat, with a slight lift at the outer coil, to find its pin, without learning to scrape. He offers the balance to the pallet fork. The impulse jewel catches the fork slot, the cock settles 1 screw, then the other, then the center. He gives the key 1/2 turn, not a full. He nudges the balance rim with a feather of pegwood. It swings and returns and swings again. Escape wheel teeth begin a conversation with pallet faces, limited and kind. Tick becomes a sentence. The watch's room gets measured for the first time today. Anchor, poising and truth. He lifts the balance again and sets it on a poising tall knife edges. A V that tells where the heavy places exist. The room rolls to a stop, the same place drops twice. He takes a speck from an undercut with a sharp graver, sets it again, watches it stop without favor. He holds a roller table up to the window and checks the impulse jewel's line against the stuff, it reads true. He puts the assembly back and winds 2 turns. The amplitude reads in his eye like a language he has lived with too long to translate aloud. A case comes from a drawer, silver, hallmarks inside, lion, crowned head, a letter in a cartouche that says when, and a tiny mark for the assay office that taught metal to fear nothing but false mouths. Hinge pins lay where they belong, the inner lid shows a dust cover that will keep flour from a baker's pocket from learning about the balance. He checks the fit, movement to case, case to movement, no rock, no shake. He snaps the hinge and listens, hinges that say too much, hinges that want a file later. This one keeps confidences. Dial and hands now. Enamel dial comes from a circular box lined with soft paper. Feet fit into plate holes and secure with dog screws. Hands in a tray. Hour hand like a small leaf. Minute like a narrowing spear. Seconds for a sub-dial with modest ambition. Steel hands need blue, these already own it, a tide color earned in the flame yesterday, when he held steel over a brass plate and watched straw turn purple, turn cornflour, then took them to cold before vanity could spoil the line. He fits hands with a hollow stake and the touch from the staking sets light hammer. He tests clearance, no scrape at 12, none at 2, so time will not catch itself, and repeat a minute without permission. If your eyes soften a little, the watch will keep its first hour without a chaperone. Oil will not migrate jewels, will not salt the fusee chain, will walk its cone in an obedience taught by math and faces that met with tools rather than applause. Anchor, timing. He sets the watch on a small timepiece that beats seconds, a glass bell sits over both to keep drafts from telling lies. He reads against a regulator on the wall that sets the town. Pendulum, escapement, a beat you can trust. He takes a first reading now, another after a quarter hour, adjusts with the regulator curb index that lengthens or shortens the active spring by a whisker. A breath shorter and the minutes pull ahead, a breath longer and they give back. He marks the cock, fast and slow without words, only a scale and the habit. He sets again and watches the error shrink like a scandal dragged into daylight and turned into a footnote. A client arrives as quietly as brass settles. He holds a watch that learned to be reluctant last week. The watchmaker listens to it near his ear. Not for romance, for beat. It argues on its back, he says. Not unkindly, we will find the loan and collect it. He opens it and pegs a jewel that learned a grain of dust from a coat. He oils a cap the size of a dot. Not even pride could see without help, and winds it half. The watch settles to the right voice The client likes to understand, but likes more that his father's watch will do another season of modest work. He leaves a coin that wears a monarch with an expression that says nothing useful. The coin goes into a box with others that will become rent, oil, filings, and a child's shoes if a child happens to be in the world to need them. Anchor, the bow, the chain, the key. He fits a stronger bow to the case, so a chain will hold without teaching silver to thin, where it refuses to even notice thinning. He polishes the crystal with rotten stone, light and round, never across, because scratches behave like rain, they follow slope. He checks the hinge spring on the dust cover and relieves a corner with a file, because a piece of metal that speaks every time you open it would tire everyone in the room. He wipes with a cloth he keeps in a tin so cloth won't learn grit, while highly qualified to misbehave. Noon finds him at the window. He sets the new watch by the regulator, then steps outside to see the time ball drop at the top of the market hall, 1 o'clock each day. The town's chronometers and small pride kept in line. The ball falls. The watch says so. The regulator agrees. He nods with a satisfaction he would not bother to name. Back inside, he winds a French carriage clock for a widow who likes the tick and cannot abide the thought of silence. He sets its platform escapement straight and sends it on with hands that point at the hour as if pointing had been invented. For this, anchor, the file room and the little furnace for a heat blue. In a tray lies a steel spring that needed a second temper. He sets it on a brass plate, warms it above the burner until straw becomes purple and purple becomes blue, then kills the color in oil so it stays. He burnishes a pivot shoulder with a rung rod polished like a mirror. He uses a smoothing brooch in a hole he gauged to honest. He satisfies the brooch with oil and a twirl. A touch with a pith wood stick steals 1 crumb of grit from a jewel, where grit had meant to grow an estate. He puts each tool back in its place. Tools, like children, like to know what they should expect when morning introduces them to work. If you drift here, if lids lower and raise without bringing the rest of you along, the balance will not mind. It will go on in circles with a patient's watches taught and learned from each other. The fusee will read its chain. The mainspring will remember not to growl. The escapement will kiss and let go. Toward late day, a boy from the assay office runs in a case whose marks are still warm in the mind. The lion looks just as supercilious as yesterday, which means authentic. The watchmaker fits a movement that deserves silver rather than brass. He checks the hinge again, sets pins with a punch no larger than a thought, and opens and closes until the case forgets to be new and learns to be inevitable. He dusts, covers, sets under a dome, and writes a line in the book. Mr. Clark, silver pair, full service, pivots, chain, oil kept to time. He sweeps filings from the bench lip into a drawer where gold dust makes a quiet bank. Later, he will burn the rag and save the ash, because ash refuses to tell lies if melted with attention. He dips the tweezers in benzene and shakes them dry over the sink. He sets the brooches where their points cannot learn to greet other metals by accident. He returns the turns to their box and wraps the bowstring. The gravest tips rest under a slip, so a clumsy passing sleeve won't start a sermon. Evening brings the regulator's small click as the escapement drops its last tooth for the day. He winds it and notes the arc, sets the beat with a gentle toe to the crutch. The pendulum settles, the room keeps its tempo. The new watch sings behind glass with a voice that only those who spend their years with small compounds of steel and patience know by kinship. He writes 1 more ledger line date. Service, parts replaced, and closes the book with a thumb that sits exactly in the place the page likes. He takes the glass dome up and places the finished watch in a case lined with paper printed with little vines. He ties the case with string and melts the end with a taper, so it will not forget to be string. He sets it with its fellows, ready to give back to their hands. He blows the bench free of lint 1 last time, covers the mat, and checks the window latch that suffered an insult from wind last February and has been forgiven but not forgotten. The bell gives 1 discreet note again when he opens the door. Outside, the lane has earned the first lamps. He looks once at the sign, a gilt key, sees that it still hangs true, and steps out. Inside, The balance wheels do not stop. Because a door shuts, they keep their rooms honest by small insistences all night long.